dan ketertiban acara ini. Terlebih dahulu kami memohon dengan segala hormat kepada seluruh peserta untuk memastikan kondisi ruangan tempat Bapak Ibu berada dalam kondisi yang kondusif atau menonaktifkan suara, memute akun Zoom-nya selama kegiatan berlangsung. Webinar ini direkam sebagai bagian dari dokumentasi, juga disiarkan secara live di laman kajian literasi baru channel. Untuk itu kami mohon kesediaan Bapak dan Ibu untuk mengizinkan proses ini. We're about to start this session. For those who are participating in the Zoom meeting, please kindly make sure that you mute yourself during the presentation. Our co-host team will assist you to do so in case you found any difficulties. For your information, we are recording this session for our documentation and do live streaming via Kajian Literasi Baru channel. We seek for your consent pertaining this matter. Thank you. So good morning and good evening, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to Literacy Talk Series 6 with the topic Literacy Gain or Loss, Children's Agency in Early Childhood Education, held by New Literacy Studies team. Today, we are going to have a discussion on how to mitigate the literacy loss risk in early learners during pandemic and how exactly literacy loss is being described in childhood studies perspective. For the next 3.5 hours, we will have 3 speakers from University of Illinois at Urbana, Champaign, USA, Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, and Litara Foundation in parallel session. Each resource person will have 40 to 60 minutes of presentation to include the brief summary given by the moderator at the end of the presentation. I'm going to assist the moderator in becoming the timekeeper to remind you on the allotted time. Please allow me to present you a brief curriculum vitae of our moderator. So probably the team will share the screen. Dr. Sari Silviani, Ph.D., is a lecturer at English Education, Universitas Sriwijaya Palembang. She earned her Ph.D. in Literacy, Culture, and Language Education in Indiana University, Bloomington, United States of America. Her research interests are in the field of critical literacy, transnational and translingual literacies, and critical pedagogies in teachers' education and professional development. Without further ado, Dr. Sari, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Mbak Rita, for your kind introduction. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, Bapak Ibu peserta Bincang Literasi. Good morning and welcome to the 6th Literacy Talk. Senang sekali hari ini saya mendapat kesempatan untuk memandu diskusi kita mengenai literasi, terutama dalam konteks pendidikan anak usia dini. Telah hadir bersama kita Dr. Dyson. Good morning, Dr. Dyson.
Good morning.
We are very delighted to have you in our literacy talk session today. Saya
here.
Yeah, thank you. Saya juga ingin menyapa pembicara kita lainnya, Dr. Sofi Dewayani, Mbak Sofi, and Dr. Vina. Mbak Vina, selamat pagi. Terima kasih sudah hadir di sini.
Selamat pagi. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm pleased to meet all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our today discussion focuses on early literacy education and early literacy with the emphasis on the impact of pandemic school closure on children's opportunities to develop literacies. We will take a closer look at the developmental gain or loss within childhood studies. Bapak Ibu sekalian, karena keberagaman latar belakang peserta dan pembicara literacy talk kita kali ini, saya akan menggunakan bahasa Indonesia dan bahasa Inggris dalam memandu diskusi kita. I'm going to translate language using bahasa Indonesia and English to lead the discussion. Selama sesi berlangsung, Bapak Ibu dipersilahkan untuk memberikan komentar atau pertanyaan di chat box. You are welcome to use Bahasa Indonesia and English to ask questions or to give comments. And you can also type it up in the text box in the chat box. Well, we will begin our discussion with a presentation by Dr. Dyson, who will touch upon important issues on early literacy learning and the resources upon which children and their caretakers can build to engage in literacy practice. Before we listen to Dr. Dyson's presentation, Please allow me to read her bio. Maybe we can have that on the screen. Okay. Dr. Dyson is currently a professor at the Department of Education Policy, Organization and Leaderships, as well as at the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, United States of America. Professor Dyson has spent over 40 years studying the childhood cultures and literacy learning of young school children. Her research and scholarly works have brought respect and intellectual attention to childhood cultures and their relationship to school learning. Due to her excellent dedication to teaching and research on early literacy and childhood education, Professor Dyson has received numerous awards, and I will just mention some of them. In 2005, she received David Russell Award for Distinguished Research from the NCTE, National Council Teachers of English. And then in 2005, also, she and her co-author and collaborator, Genisi, received Outstanding Educator Award in English Language Arts. Without further ado, let's listen to her presentation. Dr. Dyson, you have 1 hour for presentation, and then it will be followed by 20 minutes question and answers.
Okay.
Please, Dr. Dyson.
Okay, well, I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Let's see if this works. And I better put my reading glasses on. I know everybody is having Saturday morning, but I'm having Friday night. So let's see. And let me just set it up for a minute. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Yes, very
Yes.
clear.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for letting me know. I think in terms of the pandemic, probably the implicit message is when children are deprived of each other, they are also being deprived of lots of opportunities to learn. That's probably the overriding theme of this talk. So as you can see, my title is We're Playing Sisters on Paper. And this is an excited utterance made to me by a 5-year-old who had figured out a new way to play on paper. So this story will figure into my contribution to our discussion this morning. And first I'll tell you something about me as a researcher and about my perspective on childhoods. And then I'm going to highlight 2 findings from my work over the years, and I'll draw on those studies to illustrate these big points I want to make. Now, the stories, of course, are all from urban areas in the States, but I think the big ideas are relevant across the oceans. I think they're globally important. So the first of these big ideas is that children's learning and development as literacy users is not dependent only on the teacher, but it's also dependent on the classroom culture. And by classroom culture, I mean the meaning-making practices and the relationships between and among teachers and kids. And learning is especially dependent on children's relationships with each other. I love this image. It's not from the States, it's from Latin America, but you can see that all of the social activity happening around this little girl. I forget, you can't see where I point, but you can see there's a little girl running and everybody, one child's laughing and another's giving her a hint, and she's the subject of much attention. And if I were a researcher, I'd be right back there. I'd be figuring out what the heck is going on with that little girl and writing. So that's my first big idea. And the second big idea is that if you're going to have a classroom culture where everybody belongs, then in these times, there are lots of societal divisions. In the States, it's racial and ethnic divisions, and they intersect with social class divisions. And these present challenges to children for a sense of belonging. And if you don't feel like you belong, you don't have workable relationships with the other kids, then it's going to be harder to get opportunities to learn and also just to be happy and have a good childhood, which is very important to me. So, so first I want to say, before I start these and start with number 1, I want to say something about how I have studied writing and what childhoods means to me. Now, over the last 40 years, I actually started in about 1978. I observed children writing, but within children's lives together, within childhood cultures. The major research question has been, well, what relevance does writing or literacy have for children as children? Not as future grown-ups, but right now, because that's what matters to them. Just what their presence, their life as it's unfolding. Now, childhoods are, of course, biologically the early part of life, but what childhood means and how children should be socialized and valued varies tremendously across cultures all across the globe. Nonetheless, children have agency in the construction of their own childhoods. They observe, they interpret the world around them, and in response, they create their own worlds, their childhood worlds. And in those worlds, no matter where they are or where they are from, kids want companions. They want someone to play with. That's probably a universal, that kids want companions. We all want companions. And they also want to feel some control, some agency in their world. So they construct their own social world using whatever they have at hand. So I'm interested in what kids find useful and meaningful about literacy, and I have focused especially on writing. Now, the thing is, to learn any symbol system, not just written language, but any system, there has to be some intention to represent and to communicate, to take some action in the world. So becoming literate is not just about learning the alphabet and the sounds of the letters. That's useful knowledge. But writing itself as a social act is about having an intention and orchestrating whatever knowledge you have to fulfill that intention. And as I said, little kids like us all want companions. They want someone to play with. And I'm going to show you that this is very evident in early writing, at least when I've observed it. I've observed it when it's been tolerated by the teacher. I've observed it in classrooms where the kids are supposed to be quiet, but they don't. I've observed it all over the place. So the first finding I'll address is this one: where does writing come from in children's lives as children? Now, there are 2 aspects to addressing this first question. The second one, about peers and play, is most important to me, but I feel like I need to say something about this first aspect. That we know that writing is a cultural activity and that it connects people. It's a relational skill. We use it to communicate, including with ourselves. Now, its uses vary across families, communities, cultures, but common uses might be to make lists, to make reminder notes, to label clothes, to write friendly notes or irritated signs, do not touch. To write messages, to travel in cyberspace if you have the technology. And of course, people write books that we love or rhymes we recite, and children can write books too. Children will learn from observing and joining in on whatever literacy activities are at hand. So maybe they'll participate as active, perhaps scaffolded or guided participants, as in the making of birthday cards for peers, or as people who play with the goings on that they've observed. In a dress-up corner, if you're lucky enough to have one, kids might enact In the States, they'll enact a fast food theme or check train tickets to Chicago. Or they might send text messages on a make-believe phone. When children play, they show us what they have observed and learned about literacy practices in their everyday life. My favorite example comes from 6-year-old Tiana, one of my all-time favorite kids, who was playing fast food restaurant with her good friend Mandissa. Now, Mandissa was in back of the table, and on a back table, she was making Play-Doh burgers. But Tiana was in front of the table, and that table was her counter. And she greeted her invisible customers as she took invisible notes. And she talked like this: "Miss, you want a drink to go with that number 10 burger? Any sauce? Yeah, here you go. Have a nice day. Next." Like that. That's very much how people talk in fast food places in the United States. And you can see what she knows. Like, she knows, you want a number 10 burger? So she's seen these kinds of displays, like where number 3, which I don't recommend, is hot dogs, 2 hot dogs. Number 4 is a cheeseburger. Number 1 is a sub sandwich. It's probably getting toward healthy. But, you know, she has this in mind. She's done this. She's listened to the talk. She can play it. So we know that this is a literacy practice that she's familiar with, and she plays it out. Tiana was an amazing verbal gymnast. She eased between styles and registers. She knew different kinds of Englishes. There are all kinds of Englishes spoken in the States, and she knew a number of them. She also knew that a round piece of clay could be a hamburger, and she knew that simple uninvited display stood for kinds of sandwiches. And she knew her job was to record what it was people wanted. Now, the next part of it, though, is, well, how do kids get a sense of symbol use anyway? How do they learn that one thing can stand for another and make a world? And the first place where kids begin to understand symbols is certainly not in written language. It begins in play. So play is kids' entry point into abstract thinking and into critical thinking, that the world could be otherwise than what it is, which I think is an important thought right now. So I'm going to illustrate this with this box. You'll either be impressed or bored, but I'm going to use this box. Now, this box is going to help me explain where writing as a symbolic act comes from. I'm going to start out with make-believe children, and then I'll move to real ones. Now, initially, as the Russian psychologist of the last century explained, Vygotsky, meaning resides in objects and in the recurrent activities that give those objects meaning. So to quote a children's book by Ruth Cross, a hole is to dig. A box is to put things in. Just as a door is to open, a window is to look out, spoons are to eat with. Children's actions at first are tied to the material situations of their everyday life. So how do we get liberated from the way things are? Well, I'll show you. Imagine a couple of young kids. And imagine those kids climb in that box. And imagine that one begins to steer. They look like they're steering, but I'm not very good at these figures. One begins to steer. And with that steering, the box becomes a car. And the children become traveling companions going down the road all by themselves, no adults required. Maybe the other child picks up a small box and then begins to rock that box back and forth, telling the other one, shh. And with that rocking and that shushing, the box becomes a baby. The child, a caring parent, as well as a traveler. Now that small box is not an independent symbol for a baby, nor is the bigger box quite yet an independent symbol for the car. The meaning depends on their play and on their movement, their gesture, and their talk. So the one child goes, there, baby. And that helps the box. That's the pivot to helping the child detach the meaning from a real baby and recreating it in a situation with a box. It's an imaginary situation, and it's in play that children learn to represent, manipulate, and examine their world. It's through play that children enter the realm of abstract thought and in the process gain some measure of freedom from what is, even as they follow the rules of the world. They're not going to throw the baby out the car because we don't do that. Now imagine now those two children are traveling down the road and one notices that the corner of the box has been crunched in. Says the child to her companion, we've had an accident. Symbolically, their behavior is now more complex. Not only is the box a symbol for a car, but on the basis of that symbol, a dent in the box can become, a dent in the car, which resulted from an accident. This is called second order symbolism, where one symbol depends on another. You wouldn't have a dent if you didn't have a car, right? If you didn't have a crunch in, you needed the box. The box is the car, and on the basis of the car, a dent in the box becomes a symbol of a dent in the car. One symbol builds on another. This is what written language in an alphabetic system is dependent on. So if this written word, cat, C-A-T, is built on, in an alphabetic system, the word cat in some way. English is far from perfect this way, but cat, and that symbol represents some image of a cat or maybe an actual cat walking by, but the written builds on the spoken in an alphabetic system. Of course, they all aren't alphabetic systems, but English is, and that relates to the cat. And that's very complicated. How are you going to explain that to a little kid? You're not. They're just going to learn it by participating, by doing. And play is one of the ways that it'll begin to, that idea exists for them. So before I elaborate, let's go back to the kids in the car, in the box. As those kids illustrate, during the preschool period, so 3 to 5 years old, children use talk to establish the play frame, pretend this is my car, to transform identities of people, I'm the driver, and to carry the narrative forward. In Vygotsky's view, drawing is another way of using talk to write a world, to represent a world. And if you listen, if you're around little kids who draw stories and you listen to their talk, you can hear this. You can hear this. This is Alicia, and she said she drew a box and then she added wheels and she said, this is my car. Just like, this is my car, the box. Now I drew a box, I do the wheels. This is my car. This is my car. I'm driving. This is her. You can tell it's her because she just really liked hair. And the symbol for girls, which is interesting, is a long hair for Alicia. And this is a boy, he has short hair. Although actually some of the boys had dreads. Do you know that African-American hairstyle of long braids? So it didn't really match reality, but that's how she did it. That's how Alicia did it. So she might have made the car small and put the emphasis on the road if that was what her story was going to be about, where she went, but she didn't care where she was going. She wanted to really emphasize who was in the car with her. not mom, not a dad, but this me, this Latrez, this Odette, this Deja, this Denise. There's only girls in here, says Odette. Boys can be here, countered Alicia. My mama don't care. You can see boys. Odette, I think, was distracted by all the curly hair, but this is Latrez. You see, he's got the short hair. So speech, movement, and graphics are literally playing off of each other, and the child is playing on paper. With this kind of semiotic theater, children may begin to write letters, numbers, or words that are necessary for the play. So Alicia writes me for her, and then the L is for Latrice, and then she had to stop because the teacher said it was time for lunch. But otherwise, she would have kept going. And I don't know if you can see on the, whoops, if you can see, but down here, can you see where she wrote car, K-R? You might not be able to see that. I can't see it on my screen, but underneath the car, she wrote K-R for car, which of course isn't how you spell car, but that's how she spelled car. I'm going to show you an earlier stage of Alicia in a little bit. So in time, so you might recall this in a little bit. In time, children must learn that they can draw not just objects or the names of objects, but voices themselves, that they can draw words. Vygotsky imagined a linear line from playful gesture to drawing to writing, all means of expressing talk, but I don't think it's that neat at all. Children draw, they write, they talk, sometimes they act out scenes, all in the same event. I've called that symbol weaving. And if you think about contemporary times when, if you have access to technology, multimodal text proliferate, children must learn to differentiate and alchemize the power of varied symbol tools to make meaning on paper or on screen. So I had to figure out, okay, so I want to present these ideas. What will the words do for, and what do I have to have an image for? Nobody's going to know what the heck I'm talking about. So it's relevant. So this is a image I think captures the movement I'm trying to portray. Here are these kids, the kids in the on the side with the Legos are building something together. And over on the other side, there's kids and they're writing together, but they're working on their own paper, but they're also paying great attention to what the other one is doing. There's a togetherness there. There's always, unless you really discipline them constantly, they're going to talk, at least in the States. It's hard to get kids to be quiet. So now I'm going to tell you two stories to capture this movement of children situating writing in relationships. They're not just doing their work. Now, the first vignette is going to feature Alicia, and the second is a little boy named Lamont. I don't remember what his fake name is all of a sudden. I think it's Lamar, but if it isn't, I'll correct myself when I get there. Now, both these schools are in the Midwest of the United States. They serve primarily low-income kids of color. Both classrooms had official composing programs, including a daily time when kids could choose their own topic. There were lots of assigned topics during the day, but they had to choose their own topic. Now, the one is for a kindergarten, and that's a drastic change from when I taught school in the 70s, 1970s, and there were no pencils allowed in the kindergarten. It was really, the emphasis was on play and talk, developing language and storytelling. And you sang the alphabet song and that kind of thing, but it wasn't a big emphasis, and it's totally changed now, which in many ways makes me sad. Anyway, they both had a composing time when you could choose your own topic, and the first grade had a sharing time, which was absolutely popular. Kids looked forward to that time, especially if they thought they could make their peers laugh. Now, both teachers were very loving and patient with every child, but they were monitored to make sure they were following the mandated curriculum. And the mandated curriculum really was that children should write and not talk, but all the kids talked. Both the kids, I should say, were African American. I don't know that that's so relevant in these stories, but they both were. So here's the first one. This is Alicia again, and this is before the example with the car. And what she's supposed to be doing is sounding it out. There's great emphasis in kindergarten on learning to sound it out. Most of them have no idea at the beginning what the teacher is talking about, but that's what the curriculum tells the teacher to do. By week 5, the kids should be sounding out their words. Alicia hadn't figured out the second order nature of the written system, that the letter is related to the spoken word is related to the image. Mainly, she just made what writing looked like, and then she would just make up what she wanted it to read. Alicia was highly social, and her best friend was Willow. Willow did not like her name misspelled, and so she used a magnetic letterboard to teach Alicia to spell her whole name, Willow. So Alicia's first written name word beside her name was Willow. Now, to illustrate the importance of Alicia's relationship with Willow, I'm going to tell you this story. This text, which I apologize, I know it's a little bit hard to see, happened one day when the kids were to write a letter to their moms or their grandmas. And Alicia says, I'm gonna write my mama and my dada. And Willow says, I'm your sister. She isn't really. I'm your sister. And Alicia says, I can put you in here with my mama and my dada. We're playing sisters on paper, says Willow. After drawing her expanded family, her mom, her dad, I know these look like they all have ribbons on their heads, but those are hearts. They're people she loves. There's Willow, and there's her brother, and there's Alicia. So after drawing her family, Alicia quickly wrote letters on each of 4 lines. Each line ended with Willow's full name. So you can see Willow, and then I've whited out, I erased the last name because that's to protect privacy when I talk about this in the States. So Alicia the teacher comes by and Alicia reads her piece as Willow listens. Alicia reads, Mom, you is me and Willow, Mommy. I see Willow in my dreams. Her's my best sister. Hey, says Willow, there's no 2 Willow. Willow, Willow, Willow. She points to each of the willows on the lines. Willow, 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 Willow. No, this you. Pointing to the third figure. That's you. Can you see what's going on there? She wrote, Alicia just put letters down that she knew Willow, and then she read it. Mom, you is me and Willow, Mommy. I see Willow in my dreams. Her's my best sister. And Willow listens to that. Alicia reads 2 willows, but Willow tells her, you wrote 4 willows. How come you wrote 4 willows and you read 2 willows? That doesn't make any sense. And Alicia says, well, you're right here. And she points to her picture. You can see that Alicia is right on that borderline between not quite getting it yet. Not quite. But you remember from the car story that she does get it because she keeps talking with her teacher and with her friends and she figures it out. But it's just so interesting that Willow is trying to teach her second order symbolism. She is not using that language, but she's telling her if you speak something, it should be represented in writing. To her, to Alicia, though, the drawn figure was Willow. The letters were the letters of her name. And she didn't have that connection with the spoken word. The teacher, and how would you explain that? Look, honey, written language is a second order system. So you know how you say words? So now we're going to relate the written word to the spoken. No, good luck on that. You have to involve them in the doing, and over time through talk and activity, they learn. The teacher told the children to sound your words out, a direction that seemed to mean to say your message out loud. I see Willow in my dreams. Still, Alicia's desire to engage with her friends kept her interacting about, manipulating written graphics on the page, and in time she did figure it out. Now, I don't know how much time I have left, and I definitely want to get to the second point, but I have one more story. It's more sophisticated. I could skip it or do a short version. Where am I in terms of time?
I think we can have about 7 to 8 minutes before the Q&A, Dr. Dyson. So yeah, I think we can have.
Okay. So I'm going to skip this one so that I can, goodness sakes, so I can say something about inclusiveness. The thing about the Lerone story, he was supposed to have details in his writing, and the kids were playing pine cone wars out on the playground. You can see they have a lot of pine trees and a lot of pine cones. They had teams and they chased each other and they threw pine cones on each other. And then one day the playground was full of snow. They weren't allowed on the playground. By the way, they were not supposed to be throwing pine cones on each other, but if you're careful about it, you can throw pine cones at each other. So they took 2 snow mounds, they made it their castles, and then they used little wood chips as men. They called them men. Now the game on the playground had been boys and girls together, but now they were using the word men, the men in their castles, and then they were trying to take down each other's men with wood chips. So then they go inside and pretty soon they're drawing those wars. It's in the drawing and they have to write, but the writing has no action in it. It just says who's going to win and who's going to lose. It's nothing. But look at all the detail in the drawing. Then along comes Tiana. She wants to play, and the boys don't want her to play, and she gets mad and she says, I'm going to have a team of tough girls. We're going to be tough girls. And so then the girls are taking on the boys, and she says things like, no way the boys can beat the girls. They can't lay a hand on us. No, you can't stop us not a bit because they don't have enough things. She goes on and on and on. And pretty soon all the action, which had been in the drawing, was now played out in the text. And the stories got very long. So where the symbolic action was happening kept shifting. And but of course, writing about war is kind of troubling, and the teacher had a long talk with them about what happens in real war, and they agreed with her. They had relatives in the army, and so they didn't write about war anymore, although the game kept up on the playground. And I asked Lerone, his name wasn't Lamar, his fake name is Lerone, I noticed you don't write about war anymore. And he said, that's because the teacher thinks it's real war. She doesn't know it's play. So that was that. So now we come to part 2, which I really want to talk about. So I don't know what your situations are, but if you're in a situation where the kids are crossing many kinds of societal divides. In the States, it's race, ethnicity, language, and social class are probably the big ones. And these social divides bring up the challenge of belonging. If it's important for kids to interact with each other, if they learn a lot from that interaction, if they actually learn to compose that way, then what happens if you don't belong? So this has been the subject of this last book I've just written, where I followed this little boy named Tavan from preschool. He had a wonderful, very inclusive preschool up through second grade. So it was a long project. And it became a project about belonging in the middle of the racial and class tensions that have always been a part of United States society, but are particularly strong now. Now, the preschool was served mainly low-income 3 to 5-year-olds of African American, like Tavan, Latino, and white heritages. And the children embodied their diversity. Some spoke multiple languages, others had culturally marked hairstyles. Tavan had braids or ways of referring to kinfolk. So the Latino kids said tia for aunt, and on and on. All classroom media, including books, were culturally and racially inclusive and most relevant for us. Whether they were building with Legos, storytelling, or writing their name, the children were varied in their resources, but they all participated in school activities however they could. If one had trouble, then one practiced, and eventually one could say, I did it, and others could say, you did it. Learning was just part of living, and play, which dominated the day, was a way of learning. Now, what happened was it became time for Tavan to leave the preschool, and he had to go to elementary school. And the school city had a segregated history in which Black and white folks dominated in different sections of the city, which led to schools that were differently populated. So to try to overcome this history, the school district had a plan in which they assigned kids to one of 5 schools parents could choose. So Tavan was assigned a place in a school serving a primarily white, relatively affluent neighborhood. But of course, that doesn't do anything for helping really integrate, really getting a sense of connection among the kids, just sticking kids together. That's not going to do it. Now, in Tavan's new school, in the old preschool, everybody celebrated when somebody did it. In the new school, everything was about, you should have done it already if you didn't do it yet. Because in this new school, it definitely was influenced by neoliberalism, or the idea that school is a commodity. You measure its worth by test scores. So much was made of locating kids on a ladder of designated basic skills, a singular way to progress. It was not what I prefer, a jungle gym that kids can enter and build on their diverse resources, so that we have, as Maury Clay used to say, different paths to common outcomes. Everybody has to go on the same way up the ladder. And for a reason I'll tell you in a minute, the kids who ended up on the top of the ladder and were labeled bright were all from the neighborhood. The teacher was loving and supportive, but given the school's push toward high test scores, that benchmark ladder was important. The fact that little kids have diverse learning paths and varied timetables was not important. And then the overwhelming discourse in the city, they talked about what they called the achievement gap, and that had all great swaths of children labeled as kids needing help. And this is something that the kids learned from the neighborhood, because they had heard their parents discuss whether or not they should go to a private school or a public school. So they know that these kids coming into the school they might need help. In fact, from the first day of school, Tavan grappled with all these divisions between his peers. Some kids told him he had girl hair because I don't know where they had been living, but the cultural phenomenon of braids on men were curiosity. He had trouble because of his access to certain peer-valued goods that are expensive. So there was a classroom water fountain, which we in the Midwest call a bubbler. But the neighborhood kids all brought water bottles. I don't know why a little kid would need a fancy water bottle. Oh, this is what is boy hair. And Tavon, he was such an amazing kid. He got a piece of paper, he drew himself, he made himself with braids. He went up to the other kids and he said, "I'm black," which I thought was amazingly together. So here's the problem, that you have the public available and then the private. It's a wealth gap. It happens in these cities about the schools themselves, the public schools, who goes to the public schools, who tries to find a private school where they won't have to go to the public school. So this is a problem. It's a problem for this very outgoing, very friendly kid who had been such a success in preschool. And also the neighborhood kids played with themselves because they knew each other. And there was no attempt to help the kids get included. So that's a problem. If the school is going to depend that going to pretend that they don't see differences among the kids, and they're not going to mention them, and they're not going to reflect them in their books and their materials, then that leaves this process of negotiating inclusion totally to the kids themselves. And if kids help each other learn, how do kids in such a classroom find children with whom to play their way into writing? It's going to be hard. So as a case study ethnographer and Tavon's friend from preschool, I documented how inequality can be constructed in children's worlds. So I just want to give you some positive examples, though, of what Tavon could do on his own. He negotiated belongingness by reaching out to all children, but only some children were responsive to him, and not a one of them were the neighborhood kids who were labeled as bright. So the most responsive was an Iranian immigrant child named Vida. She starts with him in the first of 2 kindergarten vignettes I really want to tell. So this is really, given that when he started, he was labeled as a result of the testing at the bottom of the class because of the letters he didn't know, and he had no idea what she was talking about with the sounds. But look, it's barely been 2 months, and he's doing really well. He's doing really well. I'll tell you what it says. And what else is amazing is that he's finding his own way in. The basic skill was to sound out the words, but that's not, he's starting to do that, but he's using whatever he can to get something on the paper. So, and the reason, by the way, that the neighborhood kids did so well is because there was a neighborhood parent group, and they knew of the test from the older brothers and sisters, and they passed around examples of the test among themselves, and they practiced with their kids. The kids coming in from the outside neighborhood, of course, didn't have access to that information. It's just, it's a matter of privilege, and it's irritating. But anyway, when this story begins, it's writing time, and the children are it's hat day, and they're supposed to describe their neighbor's hat. Tavon has another agenda. So he rereads his first line, and his first line says, "I like." Now, he's also relying on words he remembers, and he remembers my and like, but he gets them mixed up at this point. He straightens that out, but right now, read like for my. I like to see. He got the S of C, Vida. He got the V of Vida. And then he's not going to write every word yet. Vida is 6 years old. You see the 6 in the V? Vida is 6 years old. And then he reads Vida again. Vida, he put my, but the teacher came by and it switched to like. And then he said, to see me, and he wrote his name, his real name, so I blocked it out. I am 5 years old. And then he wrote 6, 5. And he says, hey, look at this, Vida. Look at this, Vida. I write 5, 6, R-E-D spells red. He writes, I'm wearing red. I don't know. I keep pointing at the picture. You can't see me pointing at the picture. I do miss a classroom, but you can see he's wearing a red shirt. He's also wearing a SpongeBob hat, but you probably can't figure that out. I'm wearing red. And then he reads his first line. I like to see Vida. She likes to see me. I don't like to see you always, said Vida. I like to see my sister always. Oh, says Javon, but not me. I didn't know that. Vida says, oh, I like to see everybody. Javon says, oh, I'll write that. So he writes on the last line, I like, once again, M-Y, to see Vida. And then she helps him spell her name. He says, thanks. He keeps going. Vida, he reads the word twice. Vida likes to see, he puts an S for see, and then he's actually, I can hear him trying to sound out everybody. It's really hard. Everybody, but the teacher says time's up. You know, we got to go to lunch or something. So he stops and just puts down some other letters and that's it. So he's doing this with familiar letters and numbers, words written on the board, and to some extent attempts at sounding. All of these strategies beyond what was listed on the benchmark skills. It allowed him to make a connection with Vida. In fact, he thinks of Vida as Black like him. He told her, oh, you're Black like me. And Vida, she's new to this country, and that's fine with her. That's fine with her. She's, you know, they are very similar they're similar in their the hue of their skin. But the other thing is she's responsive to him. So that makes her like a sister. It makes her a friend because she does not pretend he's not a human being. She's taking. Nobody's talking to me, right?
I think we have some background noise.
Yeah, so that's fine. I don't care. I don't believe he would have learned so quickly if he had followed the curriculum and just sounded it out, but he used everything. And in fact, by the time this year, first year of elementary school was over, the teacher said he wrote better than the bright kids. And that was an interesting thing to say. He wrote better than the bright kids, but that meant that he wasn't bright because her use of the word bright was dependent on that test, not dependent on what the kids actually did. If I have time, I have one last story I'd like to tell, just because you can see how socially skillful this kid is. Not all kids, I just thought he reacted to the situation a 5-year-old should not be in with such grace. So imagine now it's December and Devon is seated by his friends, Vida, Nia, and Jakori, who is the other Black boy in the class. The children are to write about a holiday they celebrate, and Vida says to her table mates, I celebrate Nowruz, the traditional Iranian festival. Jakari, who has never heard of Nowruz, thinks she said naughty, and he says, you can't celebrate naughty. And Nia says, she has naughtyhood? Devon says, we're not talking about naughty. Vida says, we're not talking about naughtyhood. So the naughty talk stops because among these kids, Devon has authority. But cultural negotiations continue. Nia says, Devon, what are we supposed to do again? Devon says, we're supposed to draw a holiday. I'm doing birthdays. I'm doing Christmas, says Nia. I celebrate birthdays, says Vida. I celebrate birthdays too, said Devon. He's always looking for connections. The teacher asked them to stop drawing and writing, and Devon writes a piece that textually mirrors his position between Vida and Nia, and hailing to Corey, who has switched from Christmas to birthdays. So he writes, I am celebrating my birthday. Now me is am, but it's close. I am celebrating my birthday, and I am celebrating Christmas. Devon then draws his present on a large table with a birthday cake. Nia and Vida each have a large table with food, although they're representing very different holidays. Both of them, you get people together and you eat. Devon says, that's my present. It's a box on the edge of the table. It's falling down on my head. It hurted bad and I had to, and Nia says with him, go to the hospital. Yeah, says Devon. And then I got some bones squished out of me. And then I got my bones back in because they grew back in. And then when I didn't have a lot of bones in me, I was flat. Bones don't grow back in, said Nia. Then I'm still flat, said Devon. And Nia says, she's drawing dancing. Devon, you always dance with me. And then Vida, celebrating the ruse, then we all dance and eat. So a cultural divide appeared, and in the end, though, children had more in common than different. They all crawled into their pictures and they played, enacting joyful scenes of people gathered together for food and sometimes for dancing. And I think they illustrate what can be done when you do cross cultural lines. But unfortunately, the bright kids were left out of this. So I just want to draw some conclusions. Given even a small curricular space and a wedge of time, kids will play, using the symbols at their disposal. Without these symbols and without peer companions or the anticipation of sharing their composing with others, learning can be lonely and sometimes inaccessible. If there is to be an inclusive class of relationships, we could do worse than take our cue from Tavon's preschool teacher. In her room, race, ethnicity, language, and class did not disappear, but were evident in the images portrayed, the cultural childhoods enacted in picture books, as were variations in home dwellings and in family languages. Further, her room carried lessons about the normalcy of varied sorts of diversity and the progressive process of learning. And written language was understood to be rooted in talk, play, and drawing. Most importantly, in their room, there was an expectation that everybody would learn. It's part of being human, but their timeline and the resources they built on were varied. Devon is just a little child, but he faced big challenges in negotiating a sense of belonging in a test-driven kindergarten. Haunted by the common core of basic skills, Devon worked hard to be included, and composing helped. And in the company of those peers who were responsive, he proved to be a worthy companion, a knowledgeable and playful participant, and a skilled and dependable defender of respectful treatment of peers. By February, as I said, he was writing relatively more and more imaginatively, as the teacher said, than the bright children. Still, why should a 5-year-old have to work so hard to belong? So I hope with the help of Alicia, Lerone, Tiana, and Tavana, I have provided useful reminders of play's role, not only in childhoods, but in children's writing as a form of play. Let children talk, give them opportunities to use multiple modes, images, words, songs. Let's try to make sure that our classrooms reflect the diversity of our kids, whether or not anyone's particular classroom is diverse. Let's pay attention to the classroom culture we teach the kids. If they don't already know, let's show them that every child has some unique experience or resource to offer and deserves respect and an opportunity to share themselves with others. And the last thing that I want to say is something the preschool teacher always said to her aides: enjoy the children, just enjoy them. There's lots of joy to be had from being with kids. It certainly enriched my life, and I'm sure it has yours. Thank you for listening, and sorry to go on so long. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dyson, for sharing your research and engagement with these wonderful kids, and what we can learn from their play and literacy engagement in school as well as out of school. And I'm sure the participants in this webinar, I think, are very interested in what you have shared with us today, and they might have some questions. So, Bapak Ibu sekalian, saya persilahkan jika ada pertanyaan. I think we can have a live questions from the audience. Since I don't think I see some from the chat box. Saya persilakan Bapak Ibu, jika ada pertanyaan silakan dinyalakan mikrofonnya. Boleh berbahasa Indonesia, akan saya terjemahkan. Jika memang perlu menggunakan bahasa Indonesia, jika menggunakan bahasa Inggris juga boleh, jadi silakan Bapak Ibu. So I open the questions in bahasa Indonesia too, Dr. Dyson, and we will just translate that for you, because we have some audience who might be comfortable using bahasa Indonesia, or might be in English too. Saya persilakan Bapak Ibu jika ada komentar atau pertanyaan. Saatnya kita untuk berdiskusi secara langsung, kesempatan yang sangat baik. Waktunya saya persilakan, dinyalakan saja langsung. Saya pikir bisa ya masing-masing peserta di sini untuk menyalakan mikrofonnya.
Selamat pagi, Mbak. Saya
Ya,
Sandra.
coba saya lihat ya. Silakan
Ya,
Mbak Sandra
saya
untuk
agak
mengajukan pertanyaannya.
Sih, cuman yang saya tangkap ini kan kurikulum ini kan berarti untuk di kelas ya. Jika literasinya ini di rumah, apa prosesnya sama?
Oke.
Iya.
Baik, itu saja Mbak ya.
Terima kasih,
Mbak. Dr. Dyson, we have one question from Bu Sandra, and he asked if the process, let me just clarify, because she thought that all of the examples are from classroom literacy. Is that right, or is it also from out of school?
No, they are all from what was happening in the classroom.
In the classroom and in the school. Okay. Her question was, would you see this kind of process also happen outside of the school context? So all of this engagement and play and writing together, would that show a kind of a similar process from what we have seen from the school? Or would you see something that might be different if the context of children's doing this is at school, yeah, or maybe at a community, something that outside of the walls of the school? Yeah, that was the question.
I think that's a great question, and I'm gonna put forward what I have learned from other people, but I have to say that all of my work has been in the classrooms, because I suppose I started as a teacher of little kids, and that's where my worries are. But for one thing, I do know that in community centers, you will see similar things if it's possible, if kids have access. Now, it depends on the regulations. If they're supposed to be doing their homework, then they're supposed to have a sheet and figure it out, and some adult will sit with them and make sure they get it right. But if they have paper and they have and they have instruments that they can write with, then the same things happen. And even if they have access to computers, they'll all gather around one screen and they'll play out what's happening on that screen. Sometimes that's worried about as though it's an isolating thing. But And I have to say that I have worked in low-income schools for the most part until this last project. So I haven't seen a lot of computers because they cost a lot of money, and the schools here are dependent on property tax. So the wealth of the neighborhood influences the wealth of the school. But I do know that we have long known that the kids will gather around and play in the similar ways with computer programming. As far as at home, what I've gathered, even from how kids tell me what they do at home, it depends on if they have siblings or not. And so if they have siblings, then it may be that one wants to be the teacher, and then they'll play in a different way. Because I don't know where they get their images of the teacher. They can have a really nice teacher, but when they play teacher, the teacher is pretty darn mean. You know, she wants those kids to behave. So, but they will write, and they'll play with print. If they have someone closer to their own age, and even when I was little, I had a lot of sisters and a brother, and we used to sit around with the backs of papers and colors and talk and draw and write. Sometimes we would be mad at each other, and then it would not be nice writing, but we would write. And Tavan, he wrote a lot at home by the time he got to second grade. He asked his teacher if she had an extra notebook because he wanted to take one home. And he started writing, and he shared that with his grandma, and the two of them wrote down the lyrics to blues music because his grandma was into the blues, and so he got into the blues, and they wrote down the lyrics of B.B. King and Muddy Waters and all the Big Mama Thornton and all these kinds of things. And so I think it depends on the context that are available to them, because it'll depend on the relationships that exist.
Well, I see some more questions from the audience. So one of them asked, this is from Dwi Hanung. So what's your opinion about teacher forcing students to learn, for example, the letters and the alphabets, and students to imitate that alphabet in the homework? So more like like doing drill and instead of what we have seen from your example. So it's not really reflecting on the natural way kids are learning. So what do you think about it, especially in the context where early childhood teachers have to follow that kind of instruction in the curriculum?
Yes, I know that the pressure in many places around the globe, including in the States, the pressure for this very reductive, very anemic view of literacy and literacy skills. I think, as a former teacher of little kids, although it was a long time ago, I don't see anything wrong with, trying to teach the children the letters and sensibly, in a sensible context, helping them figure out whatever the kind of writing system is. But I don't think anybody should fool themselves that that's how you teach written language, because written language, reading or writing, are processes, they're activities. What's so hard to teach about writing in part is you have to have an intention. It's driven by the desire. If I didn't have something I was burning to say, I definitely would not have spent all these days sitting by myself, with a computer now, but before with a legal pad. The first years where there were no computers, it was just legal pads and pencils. So you have to be driven by an intention. And that's true with the kids too. If they're interested, it's because they've seen what you can do with it. So I think there's nothing wrong with giving kids some, you want to give kids access to some kinds of knowledge, but that shouldn't be the total of the program, because then you're not teaching the literacy practices themselves. You're not helping them become readers and writers who can participate in the cultural and societal activities that will help them take a part in their world now and in the future.
And this is also for parents, right? Because parents are also educator, like even early. So those things that you mentioned also apply. Yeah, we also have questions from the audience about parents teaching their children to sound out words and to make sure that they are able to code before they can comprehend text. So that would also apply to parents, I assume.
Yes, it would. It would, because they just, that's fine if they want to do that, but that shouldn't be all they do, because that is not going to make them a reader or a writer. It'll help them do well on those tests, but I don't care about those tests so much. I think you learn a lot about the kids from paying attention to the kids, from observing them. What can they do? How can you help them participate in a more sophisticated way? What do they need to know? What guidance, what nudge can you give? And also the kids are nudging each other all the time if they're allowed to talk. And sometimes they're not so polite about it, but that's just part of how they do it. Yeah. So I think that's true. And also I know, I don't know a lot, but I know that Sophie's really into children's books, and that I think sharing books, and that kids can make their own books.
Right.
Yeah, there's no reason they can't. Collectively as a class project or individually make their own books to share.
Right.
So I think that's what's going to motivate them. Letters.
To write the intention and the needs to do that.
Yeah, and that makes you want to know. I mean, like if somebody, I remember being a grad student and having to read all these really boring things, and I really did not care. And but then when I got a problem I was trying to solve or something I wanted to figure out, then I went back to them and I read them in a wholly different way. And I tried to figure out, okay, well, I see now that this helps me think through this, and this helps me with this. And all of a sudden, everything was worth doing. And I think that's how you become a student of the world, because it's driven by curiosity or intention or the desire to take some kind of social action. It's got to be there. So if you turn literacy into just, okay, you say the letters and you say the sounds and you answer these literal questions, that'll make somebody pass, but it isn't going to make an intellectually lively, socially productive person, I don't think.
Well, thank
Or
you.
one.
Yeah. Our time is limited, but I think there's one question, maybe very quick, we can address this. This is something related to research. So one participant, Yuli, asked about how do you do this research with young children as active respondent? So she's wondering if there's any certain research procedure that we should consider when we involve that. I mean, active. We are as an involving student as active respondent. I think in here it means that, you know, we are in the midst of their activities, right? When they're doing this writing and play.
Yeah.
So how do you see our positionality as a researcher in this context?
Yeah, I think that what's different about the way I get so close is that with the very little ones, I don't put much stock in interviewing, except if I ask them a question right in the middle of it. But first of all, I try to be a non-threatening adult. So how I introduce myself to the kids and how I act so that they're comfortable with me, because you know, the kids will stop talking when the teacher comes. So if they think of me as a teacher, I won't learn anything that I want to learn, because I want to see what goes on underneath, you know, underneath the veil, so to speak. I want to see what they're doing when they are not behaving in the static sense of the word. So I don't say hello and what's your name. I just listen. So I learn their names and I say, oh, I'm just here. I'm curious about what it's like to be a little kid. And one kid said to me once, you should know this by now. You should know what they were learning. They just thought that was ridiculous. But nonetheless, I just sit there and I don't say much. And then after a while, they get used to me and they make comments to me about what's going on. And then I don't talk to the teacher in front of the kids. So they know that I'm not telling on them because they worry about that. You know, she's a spy. So I have to be very careful about that, and I don't provide a lot of help unless somebody is just so pathetic. I have to give them a hint, but most of the time I want to see how they help each other. So if I become the center of attention, I won't learn anything. So I usually say I'm very busy. It's my job. It's my job. And then what's really fun is if a kid gets interested in my job and then does my job when I'm not there. And I've had a few kids over the years do that. I'll come and they'll say, well, this is what happened when you weren't here. He'll give me their notes, you know, that they, or they'll tell me about something that they think I should know what happened. And I wasn't here and I wouldn't know. And so I think they figure out. So I guess it's thinking about who you want to be with the kids, what you want to learn, and positioning yourself so that you can gain access. And I thought over the years that as I've gotten older, well, age, it won't be as easy, but bless their hearts, age doesn't seem to matter. I haven't found age makes any difference, except that I can't run around the playground like I used to. And squatting, squatting is very hard now. I can't get back up. They have to help me. So, but as far as getting close to the kids, I found the kids are very accepting because I'm smiling and I'm not mad at them ever. So it works.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Dyson, for your presentation and discussion today. Unfortunately, this is the time for the next presenters today. So you are welcome to stay with us. And we will have the second presenter today. And I will open this discussion, the second one, by inviting Dr. Tina Adriani. Panitia mungkin bisa menampilkan biar bisa kita lihat bersama. So I think in the beginning, Dr. Dyson and other committee members here in this literacy talk, we have kind of have a little bit chat with all the presenters and the committee today. So, but I will introduce Dr. Tina Adriani, who is a lecturer and head of the Center of Gender and Childhood Studies at the Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. And her education background, she received her Ph.D. from Lancaster University in United Kingdom. And prior to that, she had her Master of Education from University Malaysia. And Dr. Fina's interests are on gender, and social justice in early childhood education. Mbak Vina, saya persilakan untuk memulai presentasinya. Kita ada waktu 30 menit. Terima kasih.
Okay, terima kasih Mbak Sari. Thank you very much Dr. Sari for a very generous introduction. I have a disclaimer to make. I'm not a professor yet. I will say amin to that. So hopefully it becomes
Professor as a teacher, ya Mbak ya.
So yeah, I will say amin to that. Thank you very much, and also thank you Mbak Sophie Dewayani and Kajian Literasi for a very kind invitation. And also I'm very honored to be able to share the panel with Professor Dyson, whose work have really inspired me. So if I may please share my screen, if that's okay. Okay. Now can everybody see my screen?
Yes, very good.
Okay. Okay, in today's discussion, I'm going to present the topic on neuroscience, but please bear in mind that this is not the discussion about neuroscience. I'm taking a rather critical approach in understanding neuroscience. This is based on a paper that I wrote together with Professor Ian Newberry from University of Lethbridge in Canada. So as Mbak Sari mentioned earlier, that initially my research focused on the topic of gender in early years. Particularly, I'm interested to see how young children construct and also negotiate their genders. But throughout my field works in kindergartens in various cities in Indonesia, I've always come across with this strong word of neuroscience. Every discussion that the teachers had in the classroom always go back to the concept of neuroscience. So I was very much, and then I had a discussion with Professor Ian Newberry, and she also had a similar thing. Professor Ian Newberry is a very long Indonesianist, that's what we call for someone who is specializing in Indonesian studies, and also she conducted a long ethnography in Indonesia since 1990. She was not initially interested in early childhood education. She was interested rather in the women's voluntarily movement in Yogyakarta. But then again, throughout her discussion with some of the cadres in health integrated services or in Posyandu, she also come across with this strong word of neuroscience. So we thought it's something that we have to unpack to see what does it mean. And I think so in today's presentation, based on the paper that I have written together with her, I would like to talk about how neuroscience has constructed a particular version of children and childhood, and how, in my opinion, that construction, in our opinion, how that construction is actually sustained the neoliberal legacy. So in today's presentation, and also in the paper that I wrote, I was inspired, I was informed by the work of Van den Broek and colleagues, in which he's also, like me, problematizing the discourse of neuroscience. So my interest is actually to see how neuroscience have been used or also misused, often by scholars or policymakers. So later on, I'm sorry, there's the background noise. So later on, in my presentation, I'm going to share with you how, in my opinion, based on the paper that I wrote together with Professor Ian Newberry, neuroscience has become a new truth in the early years, and how it's really affecting the way children and young children are constructed. So before we talk more about neuroscience as a discourse, I would like to talk a little bit more about neoliberalism in Indonesia early childhood education. So my definition of neoliberalism is borrowed from the Harvey's definition of neoliberalism, in which, and I think Professor and also mentioned earlier about how pervasiveness neoliberalism currently in education setting. So Harvey's defined neoliberalism as the state's gradual withdrawal from the social provision of services like education, health, and also other social provision. In this presentation, I would particularly mention how neoliberalism is very strong in early childhood education. We can see, for example, that neoliberalism sort of like, and it's often come along with the whole illusion of democratic society. I'm not against democracy at all, but I think it is interesting to see how the concept of democracy has been used to sustain neoliberal agenda. And in this sense, the neoliberal agenda is there to slowly remove the responsibility of the states from education. Up until today, for example, in early childhood education in Indonesia, the budget from the government is is still very low compared to other level of education. It's only approximately 2.6%. Until today as well, early childhood education is not part of free education, meaning it is the responsibility of the parents to pay for the tuition fee. And this situation creates another problem, which is related with privatization and also commodification of early childhood education, because early childhood education is not a part of free education in Indonesia. For example, 98% of early childhood education is owned either by private sectors or by community volunteerism. Now, and this is where the problems coming with this privatization of ECE, because we see the huge discrepancy between different types of early childhood education. In the urban areas, for example, many ECE centers, they have a good, strong financial capital that allows them to open, put in quote, high quality early childhood education. But at the same time, they also charge a very expensive tuition fee from the parents. While at the same time, in the villages, in the rural areas, for example, early childhood education is run by people's volunteerism. Many of the teachers are not being properly paid because the tuition fee is also relatively very low. So many of the teachers are not being paid. And it's also very interesting if we put a gender perspective on it, because there is this notion of care in early childhood education. And care, despite the fact that it plays a very important role in education, particularly in early childhood education, it is often seen as an extension of women's roles. So there is this idea of feminization of early childhood education. Early childhood education is seen as an extension of motherhood, and hence many women, most of them are housewives in the village, they are participating, becoming an ECE teacher in a hope that they are doing their part to educate for young children in their village. And as I mentioned before, they are not getting adequate payment. During this pandemic, for example, we can see that many early childhood education centers in the rural areas, they are forced to shut down their service because of their lack of financial resources. Now, another aspect of neoliberalism in Indonesian ECE is also evident if we see that despite the fact that the states gradually withdrawing from the social provision, but what happened is that they're extending their power by establishing a various standard. I think earlier we talked about, and also Professor N also mentioned, we talked about the establishment of regime of assessment, something that I would like to talk more a little bit later. So this is exactly what happened within neoliberalism, that the state responsibility is not weakened, rather it is translated, it is transformed by establishing various standards, and also the state also extending their responsibility to the private and non-government organization. So with all these pictures in mind, I think it is just sufficient to say that neoliberalism in Indonesia is indeed very powerful, and especially when we talk about early childhood education, I think it is evident that early childhood education in Indonesia is influenced or is perpetuating the neoliberal and also perhaps the neo-colonial agenda. So this is the paper that I'm talking about. So this paper has been published. So if any of you are interested to read the paper further, I will be more happy to share this paper with you. So before we talk more about how neuroscience construct a particular version of children and childhood, I would like to talk about a little bit about the history of neuroscience in Indonesia. So the history of neuroscience in Indonesia can be traced back to the World Bank's involvement in early childhood education development in Indonesia since 2001. Again, with the penetration of World Bank into early childhood education, it is almost impossible to deny the neo-colonial legacy within the development of early childhood education in Indonesia. So at that time, in 2001, Indonesian government received 21.5 million US dollar as a form of loan to develop early childhood education in Indonesia. So the money has been used to support the initial project of early childhood education in Indonesia by establishing a pilot project of early childhood education in 11 districts. The project was claimed to be successful, then it was expanded to include 50. Okay. Yeah, so the project was then expanded in 2006 to 50 districts. This time, the project was able to include 30,000 villages in Indonesia. Now, one might argue that the World Bank involvement in early childhood education and also to poor families in the rural areas might indicate the austere the austere structural adjustment package. In other words, that it is one might say that the World Bank's policy become more humanistic, become more democratic. But at the end of the day, as my friend told me, a World Bank is a bank. So obviously, again, as I mentioned before, the fact that the development was based on a loan is also creating another layer of problem and also another layer of dependency from Indonesian government to the international donor agencies such as the World Bank. Now, the World Bank policy in early childhood education seems to be influenced by the work of Heckman. I think we all know the very famous quote from Heckman, which he claims that an investment in young children can bring higher return in the future. While Heckman's theory has become the basis for many governments, particularly in the global South countries, to spend more in early childhood education and also other disadvantaged groups. But we can also see that the Heckman model of early childhood education is very much rooted on the economic models. So he sees education, early childhood education in this case as a vehicle to improve the country's economic development in the future. So at the same time, the policy, the work of Heckman is also highly, and also the policy of the World Bank is also highly influenced by the brain development theories. So basically, the brain development theories, as translated into neuroscience, believe that the children's brain development is in need of proper stimulation from the parents. And both the notion of human capital promoted by Heckman and also neuroscience has allowed international donor agencies such as World Bank to involve in more early childhood education program in Indonesia. So the emphasis toward the children's brain has to some extent has ignored the larger societal discourse. Neuroscience discourse is promoted as the panacea for the neglectful parenting style of those children from this disadvantaged background, and it's also becoming the basis for neoliberal responsibilization through early childhood education. Other research conducted by Vadenbroek and colleagues, for example, illuminates how neuroscience discourse conceals the real problems in society. Within neuroscience theory, individual issues such as parenting style are seen as the most fundamental factors in children's development rather than sociological factors such as child poverty and unequal access to education. Allen, for example, in 2011, asserted that neglectful parenting practices can damage children's brain development. Now, neuroscience using Foucault's words. So in my work, I was inspired by the work of Foucault on discourse and truth. So using Foucault's word has become a truth in Indonesian early childhood education through its reproduction as a form of authority in policies and application in the practices of early childhood education, and through the proliferation of private and public early childhood education program. This discourse connects global initiatives such as education for all or the latest sustainable development goals for Indonesia's democratization and decentralization through a shared reference to global neoliberal reforms that emphasize state retrenchment and individual responsibilization. By linking neuroscience as the truth of universal child development, the imbalance of power relation between the South and the North are erased, and children in the North are once again set a standard for understanding children's development all over the globe. Now, I have to say something that neuroscience is not only erasing the unequal relationship between the children in the North and children in the South. As mentioned earlier, the landscape of early childhood education is marked by huge inequities. We have, for example, in the eastern part of Indonesia and the western part of Indonesia, the discrepancy is very huge. The development of Indonesia is still very much centralized in the western part. So again, the discourse of neuroscience has been used in order to justify or to erase the difference between Indonesian children, particularly from the western part of Indonesia and also from the eastern part of Indonesia. As a regime of truth, the discourse of neuroscience continues to be produced and reproduced, as it is disseminated in the government's document and by government officials. There is power-knowledge relation embedded in the discourse. Thus, it is produced as a truth in Indonesian early childhood education through its adoption promotion by the state bureaucracy, both nationally and provincially, and extend into the practice of educators throughout the archipelago, who integrate these ideas in their today work. In an interview done by Newberry, for example, a teacher stated, and now it appears that what is being used by early childhood education is a theory from brain development. It's always in that direction. So several times I have attended an ECE seminar, there is always a speaker from the central early childhood education, meaning from the government. Now, being myself a lecturer in a university, I'm also fully aware that the discourse of neuroscience is also continued to be promoted within the university setting. The seminar on neuroscience, the discussion about neuroscience is very strong also in the university. But it's also very interesting that many of the discussion is not based on the peer-reviewed journal, for example, rather based on the roundtable discussion. So another example how the government. So within this idea of neuroscience, so I will argue for this presentation that the neuroscience discourse has constructed three meaning of children and childhood. The first one, children within neuroscience discourse is situated as ontological becoming. I think Professor Ann earlier mentioned that it is important for us to see the children as a present being that have time, that have an opportunity to enjoy their childhood. So to have fun in their childhood. But what happened is that within the neuroscience discourse, as we can see, children see as ontological becoming. So they are seen as an agent of the future. And it is very evident, for example, in this quotation, in which this quotation said that early childhood is the time when the young child will experience the first 1,000 days of her life. It is the golden period. And by the way, the word golden period or period emas is very strong in Indonesian early childhood education discussion. And again, as mentioned, as we can see here, it is very much rooted on the brain development theories. Now, it is the golden period or period emas because the children's brain will develop very fast. Hence, it is important for parents to pay particular attention to the type of nutrition given to the children because any nutritional deficiency during this period cannot be replaced. The first 1,000 days could be specified as 270 days in the mother's womb, the first 6 months of infanthood, which is equal to 180 days, and when infants are 7 to 18 months old, which is equal to 550 days. In the first 1,000 days, children's brain development will stimulate their physical as well as mental development in the future. Now, there is this idea that stimulating children's brain is very important because it will have an effect toward their future development. And later on, as we can see, why it is important to have to stimulate the children's development for the future development. The future is very much associated with the economic activities, and I think this discourse is also becoming very strong during this pandemic. So the truth produced by neuroscience has become, as Brown in 2004 says, a seductive science because the arguments are often predicated on image from pseudo-scientific research that seems to go beyond question. However, as Foucault reminds us, the notion of truth does not reflect trueness. It signifies the power relation embedded in it. Here, as Foucault suggests, we are not arguing against truth, but rather for understanding its contingent as well as constructive nature and its effect for children, families, in communities in Indonesia. Neuroscience as a global discourse in this context has normalized and regulated the way we understand children and early childhood education. We are made to believe that the problems in society can be eliminated by fixing children's brain, which we can see and measure transparently, and the condition of children can be better by stimulating their brain. Neuroscience, without any doubt, as mentioned earlier, has made educators and policymakers overlook more significant problems such as poverty and global inequalities. Now, the second discourse of neuroscience is also constructing a particular version of children. And this is the children which is transparent to adult surveillance. Children's mind can be made visible through both technological means and standardized development measure. The development of neuroscience has vindicated various treatment and measurement of young children. Neuroscience as to techno-scientific discourse links the transparency of the brain and appropriate development with the goal of transparency in global neoliberal policy. Stratton in 2000, for example, described the tyranny of transparency in her critique of the proliferation of auditing, evaluating, and assessing measure as part of neoliberal policy reform in higher education. The emphasis on transparency and its role in reducing corruption and producing good governance has extended this logic throughout the Global South in service of structural adjustment policies. The illustration of transparency has been considered across a variety of domains, from controlling corruption and producing the good governance to the examination of ethics and healthcare protocols. In the field of early childhood education in Indonesia, the tyranny of transparency is apparent with the establishment of the assessment regime, such as the Children's Developmental Milestone Standard or Standar Tingkat Pencapaian Perkembangan Anak, an instrument established to measure and evaluate the developmental milestone of young children aged 2 to 6 years old in Indonesia. In addition to developing local instruments such as STPPA, the Indonesian government, together with international donor agencies, also relies on internationally validated instruments such as measuring early learning quality and outcome, or MELQ. This is very popular and is used quite often by the World Bank, for example. Now, at the moment, the National Center for Statistics, now it is hard to imagine actually that the National Center for Statistics is also involving in the life of young children. They're also aiming to use Early Childhood Development Index, or ECDI, developed by the UNICEF to assess how many Indonesian children are developmentally appropriate. They need to make a report that needs to be submitted for the SDG. Research shown by me a couple years ago shows how the use of this often jeopardizes evaluation of Indonesian children, particularly those living in rural areas. This instrument, the MELQ and ECDI, were developed using the norms and developmental standard of children in the global north, and hence, when used to measure the development of Indonesian children in rural areas, those children are often evaluated as being developmentally delayed. Now, it's also interesting, if I would like to link to the presentation earlier given by Professor Ann, we talk about literacy and numeracy, and I really like her approach in understanding literacy as a form of the children's ability to make meaning. But what happens sometimes, the literacy and numeracy discourse, for example, in many countries, including in Indonesia, as Ibu Sophie mentioned earlier before the webinar, is often translated as a response toward the PISA test. For example, the PISA test, as we all know, measure children's level of numeracy, literacy, and also scientific and also science. So for me, it's also very interesting how the awareness toward literacy and numeracy is moved by the results result of assessment from the global assessment like PISA test. And I think we need another meaning of literacy and numeracy, such as the one proposed by Professor Anne earlier. So, the last construction of children that we can find, or I found in the discourse of neuroscience, is related with the concept of fragile child. Here, the quote from the Ministry of Education and Culture state that research states that children's crucial period commences when the baby is still in the wombs up to the first 1,000 days of their life. According to a neurologist, when a baby is born, her brain contains 1,000 to 100 to 200 billion neurons or synapses that are ready to be connected. Around 50% of intelligence is formed when a child reaches 4 years old. 80% takes place when she is 8 years old, culminating between 8 to 18 years old. Other research has also demonstrated that love and affection can stimulate the child and reinforce her brain to develop 10 trillion brain cells. However, one single scream can break 1 billion brain cells, and one abusive word can destroy 10 billion brain cells. Now, it's also very interesting to note that even though the quotation here say research state or other research, but we cannot trace what kind of research are being used in order to support this argument. So in this quote, there lies an ambiguity in this conception of children and childhood. On the one hand, the child is constructed as an active agent capable of creating meaning and knowledge. Yet on the other hand, they are also projected as fragile human being who needs protection. The irony continues as parents are encouraged to stimulate children's development, yet they have to do it in specific ways that align with neuroscience discourse. It is obvious that not only children and childhood that are being controlled, but parents are also being controlled. Certain versions of parenting are legitimized over others. Parents' behavior is corrected without them being aware that they are being supervised. By doing this, the neuroscience discourse operates on the principle of disciplinary power. Early Childhood Education Center often acts as an institution that extends the power of government. Consequently, the parents continues to be under surveillance while the child is seen as having a fragile brain and in need of protection. Ultimately, despite an explicit emphasis on the child as active constructor of knowledge, the discourse of neuroscience implicitly positions the child as helpless. A child is seen as passive individuals who merely absorb anything from the environment and cannot create any meaning. The above text from this government document uses brain science argument to support the idea of fragile child. It is not only children and parents who are regulated, but teachers are also subjected to this form of discipline. My visit to a kindergarten in a rural area demonstrates this process. The kindergarten only has 2 teachers, neither of whom graduated from high school, and a principal who is a university graduate. The kindergarten lack of facilities, parents only pay approximately $3 per month, and still many of them cannot afford it. Most of the parents work in factories or as ojek, motorcycle taxi driver. However, since attending teachers training on neuroscience, the principal is convinced that the problems in her kindergarten lies in the teacher's teaching practices. She said, "Now I understand why the pupils in my school are so slow academically, because we are fierce with them, but now no more. We will be gentle with them." She also argues that improving children's development is easy. It does not have to rely on any materials. She said, "Children already have their brain. As long as we treat them with love, they will be stimulated." The statement from the principal signifies she believes that the problems in the school are not predicated on other factors, such as lack of facilities or poverty, but on their teaching practices. This illustrates the power of discourse to become a tool to support a new truth while ignoring other forms of truth in the society. As mentioned before, neuroscience has become a discourse that diverts teachers and policy makers' attention from poverty. The limitation of neuroscience discourse are recognized even more and more, but unfortunately, the emphasis on economic values are unfortunately perpetuated even in the time of the pandemic. While pandemic should be seen as an opportunity to highlight the importance of care within early childhood education and possibly to create another meaning of early childhood education, what happened is that the narrative focused on children's learning loss. And if we carefully examine the notion of learning loss during this pandemic is very much related with the economic loss in the future. So again, education has been reduced into a simply economic activity. And as we can see, the discourse of learning loss is also arguing that children's brain are not properly stimulated during this pandemic, and there is this worry, there is this concern that they might experience learning loss, and this learning loss might eventually affect their future employment. So here, as we can see that despite the fact that pandemic might offer us with an opportunity to redefine the meaning of early childhood education, but again, it has been used in order to strengthen, to perpetuate the neoliberal agenda. So I would like to say here that to close this presentation by arguing that there is an urgency, there is a need for us to go moving beyond the brain. As Van den Broek argued in 2014, we need to be aware that each time we use the economic argument to advocate for investment in early childhood education, we implicitly or explicitly also argue that the economic argument is the one that matters most. And consequently, by doing so, we reaffirm that the meaning of early childhood education is not to be found in early childhood, but in the integration in the future labor force of a meritocratic society. The danger is that then the inherently social nature of early childhood education and care, as well as the care in the care education, are pushed to the background. The attention to care here is important, especially as this remains an often overlooked aspect of early childhood education in Indonesia and elsewhere. Care and care relationship place children in network of relationship with other children, parents and teachers, and their own communities. I think Professor Ann also mentioned about the importance of having cultural aspect in constructing the literacy among young children. Slaby and Gallagher, for example, in 2015, in their consideration of neuroscience approaches, emphasize not the brain by itself, but rather the socially extended mind. In other words, it is the mind developing across the brain, body, and environment that deserve our attention. This attention to embodied, enacted, extended, and effective aspect of the mind redirects our concern to the whole life world of growing children. The neuroscience discourse, without any doubt, has also produced a kind of exteriorization of the self by linking the science of the brain directly to the external behavior of a child, just as the image of transparently proof damage or improvement. According to Power in 1997, the tyranny of transparency tends to produce object for inventory, control, and regulation. And this process, rather than revealing some transcendent truth, reveals some and neglect others. For the Javanese in Indonesia, for example, the self is gained through some internal process as well as the interaction with the world, and these differ according to place and culture. It is this historical, locally produced process, one that engages the growing human with the world, that tends to be neglected in the uptake of neuroscience discourse in early childhood education in Indonesia and probably elsewhere. Chowdhury and Slaby in 2016 advocate a critical neuroscience that rests partly on historical ontology of subjectivity and personhood. Drawing on Foucault as well, they argue that the makeup of human being, of self, subjectivity, and personhood is historically constituted rather than universal. In other words, the child's relationship to the world in its local and historical context must not be neglected. Attention is needed to the relationship that the child exists within. That is, it is not just the brain, but the school, the village, or the neighborhood, the family, and the socio-economic context of this critical relationship. So by this, I would like to end my presentation. And Mbak Sari, I don't think I need to translate, or do I need to say a few words in Bahasa? I think.
Yeah, if you would like to have some closing remarks after your presentation, or Ya, something like that, Mbak. Silakan diperbolehkan pakai bahasa apa saja. Bahasa Indonesia
So,
boleh.
my apologies, Professor Dyson. I will be speaking in Bahasa for a few minutes. So, ya, Ibu Bapak semua, barangkali para peserta. Jadi di dalam presentasi barusan, saya mencoba memproblematikan konsep neuroscience. Jadi saya melihat neuroscience sebagai sebuah diskursus, sebagai sebuah wacana yang tentunya mengandung relasi kuasa, dan pada saat yang sama selain mengandung relasi kuasa, dia juga sudah menjadi sebuah truth, ya, sebuah kebenaran yang begitu powerfulnya, begitu berkuasanya, sehingga dia dianggap menjadi satu-satunya cara pandang di dalam memahami anak dan pendidikan anak usia dini. Di dalam presentasi yang barusan saya lakukan, saya mencoba menunjukkan bahwa perhatian yang barangkali terlalu berlebihan terhadap otak anak seringkali membuat kita mengabaikan faktor-faktor sosial seperti kemiskinan, kemudian juga isu ketidaksetaraan akses yang barangkali sebetulnya itu lebih mempengaruhi anak. Jadi ini dalam argumen saya merupakan sebuah bagian dari agenda neoliberalisme. Sebagaimana yang kita tahu, neoliberalisme sangat menekankan kepada individualisasi, individual dianggap bertanggung jawab terhadap dirinya. Dan ini bisa kita lihat di dalam pendidikan anak usia dini bahwa kenyataan pendidikan anak usia dini masih merupakan atau belum merupakan pendidikan gratis, ini menunjukkan bahwa pendidikan anak usia dini masih dianggap sebagai tanggung jawab individu. Sehingga penekanan kepada individu ini seringkali membuat kita mengabaikan faktor-faktor sosial. Dan tanpa sadar juga di dalam presentasi yang tadi saya lakukan, saya mencoba menunjukkan bagaimana sebetulnya gagasan neuroscience seringkali tanpa kita sadari memposisikan anak sebagai makhluk yang lemah, makhluk yang transparan terhadap gaze, ya, gaze cara pandangnya orang dewasa, dan itu membuat anak menjadi objek pengukuran. Mungkin tadi juga sudah dibahas oleh Professor Dyson, the regime of assessment is very strong, and in my presentation, I'm trying to show, saya mencoba menunjukkan bagaimana regime assessment ini juga sangat dipengaruhi oleh wacana neoliberalisme. Dan yang mungkin juga sering tidak kita sadari, wacana neoliberalisme juga memperkuat gagasan bahwa anak itu merupakan makhluk ekonomi. Kita menstimulasi perkembangan anak karena diharapkan mereka bisa berkontribusi di masa yang akan datang secara ekonomi. Mungkin banyak di antara kita yang tidak menyadari konsep pendidikan anak seusia dini sebagai sebuah investasi sebetulnya merupakan sebuah konsep yang sangat betul-betul diwarnai oleh konsep ekonomi. Persoalannya adalah ketika kita melihat education hanya sebagai aktivitas ekonomi, maka kita melupakan makna lain dari pendidikan. Itu mungkin sedikit summary. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and I will be happy to have any discussion, any question from each of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fina, for very excellent presentation on this issue of neuroscience and how that impact our understanding of childhood education and all of these relation of power and the needs to develop a certain type of child, yeah, based on that notion of neuroscience and the golden age. Bapak Ibu, saya lihat ada beberapa pertanyaan, ya. Mungkin untuk kesempatan ini kita akan memilih satu pertanyaan dulu, karena setelah sesi ketiga kita akan membuka juga Q&A, di mana Bapak Ibu boleh mengajukan pertanyaan kepada semua presenter, ya. Nah, untuk yang sesi ini khusus saya lihat pertanyaan untuk diadres ke Mbak Fina. Nah, ini Mbak, ya, mungkin tentang assessment, karena tadi closing remarks-nya juga mengenai assessment. Jadi mungkin kita bisa pick up from that notion of assessment in early childhood education, ya, dalam hubungannya dengan neoliberalisme dan neuroscience tadi. Ini dari Mbak Andriani, pengelola sekolah khusus di Kabupaten Tangerang. Jadi meminta Mbak untuk share kembali pandangan mengenai assessment PISA untuk anak-anak terutama, Mbak. Jadi di benar-benar di Indonesia sangat menjadi wacana yang sangat dominan ini mengenai kemampuan siswa kita, ya, yang diukur melalui PISA. Nah, bagaimana pandangan Mbak tentang hal ini, terutama dalam konteks childhood education? So your opinion about assessment especially PISA assessment in relation to the critique that you have discussed earlier. Silakan, Mbak.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe I'll be speaking in English first, and later on I will translate my answer to Indonesian. So as probably noticeable from my presentation, I'm not a big fan of assessment. So yeah, I think I strongly agree that literacy plays a very important role in the children's life. But as Professor Dyson showed in her presentation, the meaning of literacy is actually very broad. It is something that, you know, and it has something to be rooted from the children's perspective themselves rather than a top-down approach here. So my problem with PISA is that, as we all know, that PISA is developed by OECD, Organization Economic of Cooperation Development. So again, there is this whole emphasis of skills that are believed to be needed for economic activities in the future. The fact that PISA select literacy, numeracy, and also science, I think it's also indicating that according to them, these three things are very vital for a country's economic development in the future. Now, again, this is not a critique for literacy. I think what we all need to do is that we need to reclaim the meaning of literacy. So literacy should not be something that defined by adult. It is something that needs to be rooted by the children, defined by the children, and most importantly, it has to be detached from the economic activities. I'm not saying that economic is not important, but an emphasis toward economic, as I argued before, make us look away from other meaning of education. And also the fact that PISA is a globally validated instrument is, for me, is also very problematic, because we all know that children's living experience are very diverse. It's very hard to compare, for example, the children's living experience in Jakarta to the children's living experience in Papua, for example, let alone comparing the children's living experience in America, for example, and in Indonesia. There might be some issues which are quite similar, but nevertheless there are locally contexts that are important to be recognized, and I think that local context is missing from the PISA assessment. Jadi Mbak Andriana, kalau saya boleh mengatakan, saya tidak anti dengan literasi, tapi barangkali seperti yang tadi ditunjukkan oleh Profesor Dyson, makna literasi itu sebetulnya sangat luas. Dia tidak didefinisikan oleh orang dewasa, tapi dia didefinisikan oleh anak itu sendiri. Dan tadi kita bisa melihat begitu banyak sebetulnya variasi-variasi literasi. Persoalan saya dengan PISA barangkali dua hal. Yang pertama, PISA ini menurut saya di-driven oleh economic agenda, karena sebagaimana yang kita tahu dia dikembangkan oleh OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation Development. Jadi ada kepentingan ekonomi yang bermain di dalamnya. Kenapa hanya 3 aspek yang dipilih, literasi, numerasi, dan juga sains? Karena asumsi barangkali ini akan penting bagi ekonomi negara di masa yang akan datang. Yang kedua juga saya melihat PISA problematik karena dia tidak mempertimbangkan konteks lokal. Sekarang membandingkan anak Indonesia di bagian anak Jakarta dengan anak Papua saja barangkali itu sudah sebetulnya tidak mungkin. It's not apple to apple comparison, apalagi kita membandingkan anak yang ada di Amerika misalnya dengan anak yang ada di Indonesia. Nah, konteks budaya lokal ini menurut saya yang sering tidak dipertimbangkan di dalam pembuatan PISA. Sehingga barangkali karena dua hal tadi, mungkin Mbak Andriana bisa melihat sendiri, saya bukan fans terhadap assessment gitu ya, jadi mungkin seringkali ada persoalan-persoalan. Gitu ya. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Mbak Vina atas responnya. So ladies and gentlemen, as I said earlier, we are going to have another session for the Q&A. So keep your questions. You can type it up in the chat box. But we will have the third presenter today. And then after the third presenters, we're going to have a discussion again. I would like to welcome Dr. Sophie Dewayani. Mbak Sophie adalah salah satu inisiator kajian literasi ya, yang membuat pertemuan kita saat ini possible. So this literacy talk is initiated by a group of Indonesian scholars, bisa saya bilang ya, or literacy advocates that we would like to have a kind of forum like this where we can discuss many different aspects of literacy. And Dr. Sophie is one of the initiator in this activity. Allow me to introduce her. So Dr. Sophie Dewayani received her Ph.D. in literature education from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and Dr. Sophie worked under the supervision of Dr. Dyson. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, and her research interests are in literacy and children's literature. In fact, Dr. Sophie is actually a writer of children's literature. So written both in Indonesian and in English. And she's also the member of programs called School Literacy Movement, atau in Indonesian it is well known as Gerakan Literasi Sekolah. So Mbak Sophie adalah salah satu bagian dari program ini. So that would be very interesting to know about literacy in Indonesia. And without further ado, let's listen to her presentation. Mbak Sophie dipersilakan 30 menit untuk presentasi.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Sari, for the opportunity. I'm very honored this morning to be able to speak with the inspirational educator, Dr. N. Dyson, and Mbak Vina too, with her inspirational research. I have gained a lot. Dr. Dyson has influenced like my research and interest in literacy, especially with young children. So I'm very honored to be able to speak with her. I haven't been seeing her for like almost a decade, I think. So I miss her a lot. So I hope this can be a nice wrap up, even though this is a small research that I'm currently doing with children in the border of Indonesia and Malaysia. And I also need to apologize to Dr. Dyson for inserting like some Indonesian sentences for non-English speakers in this seminar today. Let me share my screen. Jadi Bapak Ibu, topik pagi ini sangat penting sekali ya buat kita ketika berbicara tentang literasi, terutama notion atau ide dari literacy loss yang saat ini banyak dikemukakan di saat pandemi ini. Dan mudah-mudahan ini memberikan perspektif yang berbeda tentang literasi atau gerakan literasi atau kebijakan literasi yang saat ini banyak dilakukan di tanah air untuk memberikan perspektif secara utuh tentang apa itu literasi supaya kita dapat memberikan intervensi atau pendekatan yang tepat kepada anak-anak dengan menyeluruh ya Bapak Ibu ya, dengan memperhatikan berbagai aspek. Karena sangat penting bagi kita untuk mempertimbangkan aspek sosio-budaya, kemudian aspek kultural, bahwa anak juga tumbuh pada konteks yang berbeda dan pada lingkungan yang berbeda. So I'm reminding the audience, Dr. Dyson, about the different contexts that children may live. Especially in Indonesia, we have children who live in, for example, in remote areas, children who live in different contexts of families, low-income families, who also may experience the different literacy practices. And I think understanding the different contexts and cultural situations, we can, for example, formulate like the more comprehensive literacy approaches, especially in the context of school, family, and communities. And what I will present this morning is some examples from the children who I interacted with in my research. They live in urban areas. It's from my old research, but my current research is dealing with children who live in very different cultural contexts in North Kalimantan. Yeah. So this is a banner. Kita sering lihat banner seperti ini di daerah perkotaan beberapa tahun yang lalu yang berisi imbauan kepada orang untuk tidak memberikan uang kepada anak jalanan gitu ya. Dan ini menarik karena dari studi yang dilakukan oleh Bu Vina tadi, kita melihat bagaimana diskursus tentang anak atau discourse of childhood juga mempengaruhi bagaimana kebijakan-kebijakan dibuat. Salah satunya adalah bagaimana tentang diskursus bahwa anak itu harus diproteksi. I'm not against child protection, but unfortunately, we often forget that there is also participations that children make in different contexts of families. Ada berbagai partisipasi anak yang itu dilihat sebagai eksploitasi, tetapi dalam perspektif anak itu sesungguhnya adalah cara mereka dapat berpartisipasi dalam keluarga. So I think it's important that a different methodological approach also conducted in various research terhadap anak tidak hanya dilakukan pada aspek misalnya perkembangan otaknya tadi, tetapi melihat bagaimana perspektif anak terhadap kegiatan yang mereka lakukan, bagaimana persepsi orang tua dan keluarga terhadap kegiatan anak, itu juga penting sekali. Dalam kegiatan etnografi, riset etnografi yang saya lakukan, anak-anak bermain atau belajar dalam kegiatan-kegiatan yang mereka lakukan di jalan misalnya. Tentu saja ada pertimbangan kesejahteraan, misalnya keamanan dan kenyamanan anak ketika bekerja, itu juga penting. Tetapi melihat persepsi mereka yang melakukan ini, itu juga sama pentingnya. Dan ada diskursus tentang children's learning versus children's playing, which privilege upon children's activity in school, who should be dominated by learning activities. It's also perpetuating in educational discourse recently. And also what can be perceived as learning materials, like what should be taken as books, for example, used in children's learning, versus, for example, like children's interest in popular culture, which also serve as evidence in Dr. Dyson's research, for example, that children learn a lot from interweaving, for example, their interest in popular culture, as I will show, for example, in my research, that children learn how to write through her favorite comic character, for example, like Dora the Explorer. Kalau kita melihat gambar seperti ini, tentu yang kita perhatikan mungkin adalah faktor keselamatan, bagaimana anak ini di jalan, their exposure to, for example, traffic accidents. Tetapi kalau kita melihat lebih dekat, ada kegiatan-kegiatan bermain, kegiatan-kegiatan imajinatif, kegiatan-kegiatan mereka menikmati mendengarkan cerita atau dongeng, kegiatan mereka belajar dari teman, kegiatan mereka belajar, dan tentunya ada kegiatan-kegiatan literasi yang juga terintegrasi pada aktivitas-aktivitas seperti ini, seperti itu. Tentu saja, as Dr. Dyson has presented, we should expand literacy practices not only focusing on reading and writing activities, but also all children activities using their cultural resources. How they interact with text, like all kinds of text, for example, like cookbook, how they written play, like being a teacher, being a cook, being a, for example, like grocery store, like a keeper, staff. It's also very embedded with learning or writing and reading activities. Dan bahkan juga kegiatan-kegiatan yang tidak hanya di kegiatan di sekolah, tetapi juga kegiatan-kegiatan di jalan. Saya akan menunjukkan bagaimana kegiatan-kegiatan seperti ini juga sangat kaya dengan aktivitas literasi, di mana anak berimajinasi, berbicara, bercakap-cakap, dan belajar menggunakan simbol huruf dan angka. Perpanjangan atau an extension from Mbak Vina research previously, that children is not growing up in a standardized developmental stage, but they also grow up in a very specific sociocultural context, which which makes children's developmental stages is not standard. So for example, this is a kind of play that usually occurs in the street. Jadi di sini anak di sini tidak bermain air selokan, tetapi dia sedang memasak. Dari mana saya tahu? Tentunya saya mendengarkan cerita mereka, gitu. Dan anak-anak di sini mereka tidak bermain tanah, tetapi mereka berimajinasi bermain dengan mobil-mobilan. Mereka berimajinasi bahwa ranting-ranting atau kayu yang dimainkannya itu adalah truk, ya. Tentu saja they do not have toy trucks as children in middle income family do. This is what they have. Tapi mereka berimajinasi ini adalah truk mainan, gitu ya. Yang kalau anak dari middle keluarga menengah itu menyebutkan dengan fasih, ini adalah backhoe, roller, kemudian excavator dan sebagainya. Tetapi mereka tidak memiliki kosakata itu. They don't have such vocabulary. But the richness of textual symbol of material itu sama kayanya yang dimiliki oleh mereka dengan anak-anak dari keluarga menengah yang mungkin memiliki kenikmatan luxury and enjoying children's picture books, ya. Dan kemudian tentunya kegiatan berbicara, kegiatan bercakap-cakap dengan teman, saling bercerita dalam kegiatan bermain ini juga tentunya perlu dilihat sebagai praktik literasi yang juga mengembangkan imajinasi dan pengetahuan, keterampilan mereka. Sehingga di sini saya mengatakan atau I'm proposing that literacy competence should be contextualized in social practice, and it doesn't always come in the format of the result of a PISA test, gitu ya. Jadi kalau PISA test itu sudah mendefinisikan kecakapan literasi itu tertentu, begitu ya, dengan standar-standar, dengan level kognisi. Tetapi ada kompetensi literasi yang juga terbentuk pada interaksi-interaksi seperti ini. Jadi mungkin ini yang merupakan contoh, ya, contoh tadi studi yang sudah dilakukan Mbak Vina dengan yang sudah dilakukan Dr. Dyson di Amerika. Ini mungkin adalah contoh dalam konteks lokal. And what does it imply in school context? Often teachers in school, when they teach literacy and when they involve children in literacy learning, they implement very limited, for example, approaches. For example, teachers like read books, they tell stories, but what they often forget is paying attention on the very process the children do in the meaning-making process. Jadi memperhatikan proses yang terjadi pada saat anak-anak menulis, memperhatikan proses interpretasi yang terjadi saat anak-anak dibacakan cerita. Karena setiap anak unik, setiap anak membawa pengalaman dari keluarga dan dari lingkungannya, proses itu bisa jadi berbeda. The meaning-making process can be very unique and it can be very different. Jadi yang penting dilakukan bagi guru atau orang tua atau mungkin pegiat komunitas adalah melakukan scaffolding. Ini adalah teori lama ya, tahun 69 dikemukakan oleh Vygotsky. Betul-betul membimbing anak untuk melakukan atau bisa meningkatkan keterampilan mereka dari keterampilan yang bisa dilakukan dengan bantuan sampai mereka dapat melakukannya secara mandiri. Ini Bapak Ibu. Jadi ini bisa dilakukan guru-guru dengan memvariasikan pendekatan tidak hanya klasikal tetapi juga individual secara kelompok kecil, kelompok besar dengan memperhatikan apa yang pengetahuan apa yang sudah bisa atau keterampilan apa yang sudah bisa dilakukan oleh anak dan apa yang perlu mereka kuasai seperti itu. Jadi di sini area ini adalah ini yang disebut dengan zone of proximal development. Dan ini tidak bisa dilakukan oleh seorang guru tanpa memahami mereka suka karakter apa yang mereka bisa lakukan, literacy, what literacy competence, what literacy stage that they are in, like in the process of reading and writing. So I think that is what is should not be left out by a teacher. So this is a community library we helped to establish in a village in North Kalimantan, in which we provide learning assistance for literacy activities participated by children of all ages. And this is conducted by some literacy activists there. This is like the most outer village in North Kalimantan, close to the border with Malaysia. And it's very simple. The floor is just a dust, yeah. But as you can see, it has a few books, not so many as they are available in urban schools. But the literacy activities there is very intensive, in which an activist usually read a book aloud and then ask the children to involve in some activities as a follow-up. So with that activities, an activist would expand children's learning through discussions and then invite them to use what they know and what they like in their interpretation of a story. So the situation with schools there is that school usually occur in a very short hours from 7 in the morning, but usually at 10 a.m. the school ends because principals and teachers, they have to go to the field and then do other activities there because they usually have field there. And usually children would come home and they would come to these community libraries in the afternoon to do this with the activists. So you can imagine with a limited amount of time, the teaching method conducted by teachers is very classical. Usually teachers like give students assignments, ask them to do some like answer some questions from the textbooks. And usually they also have storybooks, but very limited. But it's here where I think the authentic learning occur. So I will show you some writings by done by the children. So Dr. Dyson also came up with the division of official and non-official world. Ya, official itu biasa adalah sebuah konteks atau sebuah situasi di mana ada struktur, ada sistem, ada kurikulum yang begitu preskriptif seperti itu. Sedangkan non-official world adalah sebuah situasi di mana anak-anak lebih fleksibel, mendayagunakan seluruh pengetahuannya, dan biasanya di dunia yang non-official ini juga anak-anak memiliki kebebasan, tidak dibelenggu oleh aturan-aturan. Nah, ini yang secara fisik terlihat ya dari official and non-official world ini. Kalau di sekolah biasanya ada peraturan-peraturan read aloud berapa lama, bagaimana mereka duduk, guru duduk di kursi seperti itu, dan ada misalnya ada kategori-kategori di sana, ada penjenjangan anak-anak yang sudah bisa membaca, yang sudah bisa membaca suku kata, seperti itu, ada label-label yang dikenakan kepada anak-anak. Sedangkan di dunia non-official ini, nah ini di TBM ya, ini lebih cair dalam interaksi, anak mungkin bisa belajar dengan teman-teman yang berbeda kelasnya. Di TBM ini kebetulan in the community libraries, the activists also categorize children according to their reading level. For example, like in level 1, there can be, for example, like first grade and second grader or third grader, and they learn from the same material, learning material, but it's not really strictly assessed. I mean, like children like and the teachers like do not rely on the assessment test that much. I hope I can express that correctly. So lebih cair, so it's more fluid, and children can like bring in the songs and bring in the popular character, and they can learn from older sister, because the activists are usually their high school graduates, so the age gap is not that big. So usually the activists also understand the children's interest, gitu ya. Kalau guru-guru sudah lebih tua, mereka tidak tahu Dora, tidak tahu tokoh-tokoh kesukaan anak-anak, gitu ya. Dan kadang-kadang gurunya juga tidak tahu TikTok. Sementara aktivis ini mereka lebih paham. Lebih paham dunia anak-anak dan lebih tahu apa yang saat ini sedang populer, seperti itu. Jadi mungkin ini yang membedakan antara official and non-official world. Oke, ini adalah this is taken from my old research, in which this is done by a street singer. Ada anak jalanan yang dia pengamen gitu ya, dia belum bisa membaca meskipun dia usianya 6 tahun seperti itu. Tapi dalam menggambar ini dia fasih sekali dan dia memasukkan tadi seperti cerita Dr. Dyson tadi ya, telepon tadi ya, ada seorang anak, a child who invites her friends in her portrayal of family members. Jadi ini sama seperti itu, Desi namanya ketika dia menggambar, diminta untuk menggambar keluarga, dia menggambar teman-temannya juga, and she gives one son to each of her friend, gitu ya. Ketika ditanya kenapa, kan ini kan bukan keluarga, begitu, dia mengatakan bahwa ini teman-teman saya, seperti itu. Kemudian teman-teman juga berebut, kenapa aku nggak di situ, kenapa aku nggak di situ, seperti itu. Seperti itu. Jadi ini adalah contoh dari proses ya. Di sekolah kita kebanyakan itu kegiatan menulis awal itu dipahami secara kaku sebagai menuliskan simbol, huruf, dan angka. Tetapi menulis tidak dilihat sebagai proses membuat makna atau a meaning making process. This is what is lost in our early childhood education. Seen drawing as a pre-writing, that's an important meaning making process, and not just children like bring up their knowledge about character or alphabets as a symbol of meaning, seperti itu. Nah, ini adalah gambar seorang anak, seorang street singer juga, yang dia menceritakan tentang guru yang diundang ke rumahnya, seperti itu. Awalnya guru di sini hanya menggambar menyanyi pelangi-pelangi, kemudian menggambar pelangi dan membebaskan anak untuk menggambar hal-hal yang lain. Dan di sini ini ada 2 anak laki-laki yang menggambar hal yang sama dan bercerita bahwa guru berkunjung ke rumahnya, gitu ya. I hope Dr. Dyson remembers this drawing because I presented this a lot. Di sini terlihat bagaimana anak menggambar kolam seperti itu, yang ini tidak dimiliki karena dia tinggal di rumah petak ya. Tetapi kegiatan menggambar ini adalah kegiatan yang mengekspresikan kepercayaan diri, kemudian dia bercerita, dan bercerita ini adalah kemampuan literasi yang sangat penting. We often forget that telling story competence is really important in building children's vocabulary, and thus speaking skills should be involved in children's literacy activities. Nah, ini juga resources for composing. Anak-anak jalanan itu kan mereka nonton film ya, nonton film di TV, dan biasanya apa yang mereka lihat itu tidak terseleksi. Nah, anak-anak itu biasanya melihat apa yang juga dilihat oleh orang dewasa, sinetron, kemudian cerita hantu, pocong-pocong, dan sebagainya. Dan di sini adalah gambar seorang anak yang memasukkan gambar pocong, begitu ya, ketika dia belajar untuk menuliskan angka-angka. Di sini ceritanya pocong yang punya HP, seperti itu. Ya, waktu itu ada ini 10 tahun yang lalu ketika BlackBerry masih populer. Kemudian ini yang anak jalanan yang tadi umur 5 tahun yang belum dapat membaca, sedangkan seharusnya dia sudah masuk SD sehingga gurunya gelisah, tetapi gurunya mampu melakukan scaffolding. With the scaffolding approach, the teacher was able to expand her learning by asking, for example, what do you know more about Dora the Explorer? If it's Dora, then what else does she have? For example, like that. Jadi menambahkan detail kepada gambar itu juga sangat penting. Proses mengkonstruksi makna yang juga penting karena di sini anak yang tadinya merasa inferior, tidak bisa menulis karena dia belum bisa menulis huruf, tetapi dengan pengetahuan guru yang sama dengan apa yang dengan popular culture yang dipahaminya, maka dia bisa menambahkan lebih banyak detail pada gambarnya seperti itu. Dan ini penting sekali. Kemampuan menggambar adalah kemampuan menulis awal yang sangat-sangat penting. Dan terutama kepercayaan diri ini membantu anak-anak jalanan untuk sustain ya. Self confidence is something that retain the street children to stay in school. Seperti itu. Jadi kalau mereka menikmati kegiatan literasi, kalau mereka menikmati berkegiatan bersama dengan guru, maka ini akan membantu mereka tinggal lebih lama di sekolah. Karena masalah dengan anak-anak jalanan ini adalah bahwa mereka putus sekolah dengan cepat sekali karena ketika mereka masuk SD, mereka berada pada budaya sekolah yang berbeda dan oleh karenanya mereka seperti budaya jajan, kemudian pakai seragam seperti itu, meskipun sekarang ini sekolah sudah menggunakan dana BOS ya, itu membuat mereka sensitif dan membuat mereka merasa berbeda dari teman-temannya, dan ini seringkali hal-hal yang membuat mereka putus sekolah begitu ya. And we know during this pandemic, the number of street children are rising, especially because they don't have access to online learning at home. And schools, most schools, they don't do anything to mitigate this issue. Okay, scaffolding. The scaffolding approach is also apparent in these community libraries, yeah. For example, like engaging children in fun reading activities, showing them PDF books, for example, and then using or involving literacy activists, young teachers who, for example, like can interact with children using the popular culture, using their indigenous knowledge, using the family practices, and for example, learning activities. Jadi ini yang selama ini digunakan di TBM-TBM atau community library di desa-desa di Kalimantan Utara ini. The level of presence, tingkat kehadiran anak-anak ini in the community libraries is known to be very high. In this pandemic, children keep coming to the community libraries to learn because they love to draw there. They love to learn. And we can witness, for example, like academic achievement, academic progress is really occurring in the community libraries. I think this approach is more effective than if children, for example, like learn in school setting or the official setting. Okay, these are two examples of two writings made by the second grader and third grader. They involve more written symbols. Mereka menulis lebih banyak, even though they're still struggling with reading and writing at school. But here, they are free to interweave like what they understand about the current situation. For example, on the drawing on the left, one second grader, he's a boy, wrote that I want to become a police officer because they have read a book about a police officer and they were to write about whether they want to be a police officer too, mentioning their reason. And one boy wrote that he wanted to be a police officer because he wanted to protect the National Commission for Election. This was back in 2019 during the national election in which KPU, the Commission for National Election, was criticized for committing cheating and stuff. Yeah, we remember back then the political tension is really high, and children, even though they don't really pay attention to what is happening, they pick up from the conversation of adults surrounding them about the political situation, and the notion of the National Commission for Election like appear there in their writing. And the writing on the right was made by a third grader. She's also a boy. He's very struggle with reading and writing in school too, because being a third grader, he could not yet read like well. But here, as you can see in his writing, he only knew capitals. Yeah, that's the first thing maybe that we noticed. And then he didn't recognize punctuations yet, and also other linguistic conventions. They just read stories about an owl. It's a nonfiction books, and they were to write what they. No, I'm sorry. This is a different book. This is a book about camels, and they wrote what they understood about camels from the book that they just read. Yeah, books that they read to them, and he wrote. Di situ ada bahasa Inggrisnya, so I just read the Indonesian language. It's very much embedded in the local dialect. Ya, unta lapar karena tidak makan selama 200 tahun, tapi dia kuat sekali. Kalau kami sudah 200 tahun tidak makan, kami sudah mati tuh. Tapi kami juga tidak minum, kami juga tidak kuat. Cuman unta yang kuat, seperti itu. So it's very much embedded with the local dialect. So I think it's important that the use of funds of knowledge adalah pengetahuan yang dimiliki oleh anak dari lingkungan terdekatnya. Ini bisa diperoleh dari lingkungan keluarga atau lingkungan di sekitar rumah, ya, atau di desanya. Menggunakan funds of knowledge atau material yang pengetahuan yang anak-anak tahu untuk expand, untuk memperluas proses belajar mereka, begitu. Dan kemudian juga memberikan kepada anak kesempatan untuk melakukan kegiatan menulis, menggambar sebagai meaning making process melalui kegiatan-kegiatan yang melibatkan apa yang mereka ketahui tadi, gitu ya. Karena kegiatan belajar di sekolah yang terlalu berorientasi pada tes, pada ujian, apalagi sekarang ini pada tes PISA, begitu, itu terlalu stressful, terutama di masa pandemi ini, di mana siswa harus memenuhi kewajiban-kewajiban, harus menguasai keterampilan tertentu, dan itu sangat membebani sekali, ya, seperti itu, sehingga kegiatan-kegiatan meaning making seperti ini, di mana mereka bisa mengkonstruksi pengetahuan berdasarkan pengetahuan budaya mereka, ini menjadi sangat penting saat ini. Dan ini yang harus dilakukan guru, karena saat ini guru hanya mengajarkan apa yang ada pada buku teks, sedangkan the school textbooks really heavy on very contextualized knowledge. Yeah, yeah. If you see Indonesian school textbooks right now, they are not engaging children's knowledge, cultural knowledge. So using textbooks only is not involving children to bring up like what they know. Children need to see more culturally relevant materials coming in the form of other learning mediums. Lebih banyak buku, kemudian guru mendongeng, teachers telling stories, kemudian having children like telling stories, like sharing what they get from grandparents and parents in the learning process. Ini penting sekali karena hanya memberikan buku teks pelajaran itu tidak memberikan pelajaran yang bermakna. Anak-anak membutuhkan lebih banyak proses interaktif dengan apa yang mereka punya, karena itu penting sekali tidak hanya di level early childhood education, tetapi juga basic education. Anak-anak perlu diberikan kurikulum atau pembelajaran di mana guru membuatnya sendiri, seperti itu, dengan mengadaptasi. Jadi sebagai seorang yang banyak membantu perumusan kebijakan gitu ya. Kebijakan pendidikan itu kan dibuat tidak sebagai sebuah standar seharusnya, tapi yang sampai kepada guru adalah bahwa itu harus diajarkan dengan tuntas. Itu hanya sebuah inspirasi seharusnya, di mana guru-guru harus membuat sendiri seperti itu. Demikian juga orang tua juga membuat sendiri karena orang tua yang paling tahu tentang anaknya. Children's learning is not up to the government. It's up to teachers, to parents, to mediate a more meaning-making process, gitu ya, sehingga kurikulum itu seharusnya terpersonalisasi seperti itu, bukan distandardisasi oleh pemerintah seperti itu. Okay, this is also a community library that we have to set up. This is in another region, in Bulungan region, still in North Kalimantan, but the library is located on the deck. Yeah, it's on the apa namanya di dermaga ya. Before it's a kind of terminal or port for speedboats. Ya, ini dulu digunakan untuk tempat berlabuh kapal-kapal gitu ya. Tapi tidak digunakan lagi. So it's now used as a library, and in the afternoon, children love to go there to have these literacy activities in this non-official work. And kita perlu memperbanyak tempat-tempat ini di mana anak-anak bisa mengembangkan potensi mereka, mengembangkan pengetahuan mereka dalam konteks yang non-official, sehingga mereka berkembang potensi literasinya dan kecakapan literasinya. Dengan demikian kita bisa mengembangkan literasi dalam konteks yang komprehensif. I think I will end my presentation here. Mbak Sari, thank you very much.
Terima kasih, Mbak Sophie. Thank you for sharing with us contoh-contoh literacy ya di konteks out of school, terutama yang makin memperkaya pemahaman kita mengenai bagaimana literacy dilakukan oleh anak-anak di berbagai konteks. Saya melihat sudah banyak sekali pertanyaan yang ada di chat box kita. So since we still have all our presenters today, I'm going to pick one question that I think all the presenters can address. And I think this is an interesting question from Mbak Desvi Wahyuni. Mbak Desvi, apakah ingin menyampaikan secara langsung atau saya bacakan? Apakah masih ada di sini Mbak Desvi? I'd like to invite Mbak Desvi, kalau masih berada bersama kita di Zoom ini, Mbak Desvi, saya persilakan untuk mengajukan secara langsung. If not, I will read the questions and also translate it for Dr. Dyson. Jadi pertanyaannya adalah, ada kecenderungan di Indonesia bahwa pendidikan yang dilakukan oleh orang tua menengah atas adalah sesuatu yang baik. Sebaliknya, jika ada pendidikan yang dilakukan oleh keluarga menengah ke bawah, itu kadang dianggap sebagai contoh yang buruk. Contohnya ketika orang tua menengah ke bawah mengajak anaknya untuk bekerja di sebuah peternakan atau pertanian, jadi membantu orang tua seperti itu ya, itu dianggap sebagai eksploitasi. Okay, so one question from the audience, Dr. Dyson, deals with class and how socio-economic status influence the way we view how parents educate their children. So there's an assumption that the kind of education that the upper middle class families are doing is better than the kind of education that lower income families are doing at their home or with their children. The question, give an example, one of the participants give the example that, for example, in Indonesia, it is very common that children help their parents to work, especially when they work in the farming or in the agriculture, something like that. So it is not considered as education, but it is considered as exploitation to children. Like parents do not give them the chance to have formal schooling. I mean, even if they do, it seems that the notion of introducing children to this kind of activities or engaging with this informal work is a form of exploitation instead of part of the way unique individual family raising their children. So I will ask all the presenters today to address this question. Silakan, siapa yang akan memulai terlebih dahulu? Anyone, any of the presenters who would like to
Dyson
address?
first.
Dr. Dyson, if you would like to respond to that question or issues that brought up by the participant here. Dr. Dyson, I think your microphone is still on mute.
Oh, no. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Okay. So I was just going to say that I imagine that across the globe, there are these issues related to social status and the hierarchy of status in a society. So in the States, we do have, was this about, tell me the question one more time. It's about class, how it manifests itself in school?
The question is that there is a tendency that there's an assumption that the kind of education the middle class family are doing with their children are better than the type of education or you know, like raising children by the lower middle class family, lower income especially, are not valued as good as you know, within that middle class family.
That's fine. I think that's what I was going to answer, but I think my brain cells are not working so well.
It's already late in there, I assume. It's almost at the middle of the night.
I have something to say about this because I have thought about it a lot, in part because within the states and the social status of the states, I was a very low income child myself, was raised on government money. And so I've experienced some of this growing up, especially the financial burdens of working and gaining access to higher education. But at any rate, these attitudes, which are crisscrossed with race, ethnicity, and language in the States, are very pervasive, in part because schools as institutions take as their ideal model themselves, the people who put them together, which would be a kind of idealization of a middle class, upper middle class childhood. So we definitely have that. And what it leads to is two very bad things. One, and then I want to give you an example of this at its worst. One thing is it affects teacher expectations, which has been shown over and over again. You take a great swath of children, you categorize them as exactly the same way, and you set up expectations. Oh, that's what was happening to Devon, that he was, you know, a child of color, low income. So the expectations were way down, even though he had so many strengths and so many things he could do. It's reinforced by the narrow definition of success, that literacy ladder, and those.
Coba tanya sama Yan, ntar kamu dikasih saus teriyaki, tadi kasih saus sauri, aneh-aneh ya.
That's okay. That's life on Zoom. So so it's reinforced by the narrowness of the assessments. And because that is the way schools are expecting and are assessing kids, these beliefs are reinforced, in part because, as the question implied, the resources of the kids are not valued. They don't see them. And I think that's a huge problem, and it's a very old problem in the States. So I can just tell a quick little story about Tavan. When he got in second grade, what he knew about the blues music, I don't know what you all know about the blues music, but it's a kind of music that's started in the Mississippi Delta in the southern United States around the turn of the 18th to 19th century. And it's very powerful. And after it came jazz and all hip hop and all kinds of things. But it begins with the blues, which is tied to West African rhythms. So at any rate, this little kid, through his grandma, could tell you all about these old blue guitarists and singers. He could sing like all of them. The books he could have made himself, the pieces he could have written, because that was a goal for the second grade nonfiction genres. The things he could have told people about that nobody else knew were just amazing. But it wasn't part of what was being assessed. So it's just such a lack of really seeing children as these bundles of energy and resources and experiences. A kid who spent their time on a farm is going to have all kinds of knowledge about the earth, about the seasons, about the troubles with the raising of whatever the crops are, or the herding of whatever the animals are, that other kids wouldn't have, that they could share, that they could write about, that they could draw about, that science lessons could come from. But if we don't value the kids, we don't see the kids, we just see them in terms of this narrow literacy or whatever the assessments are, then we don't know our children, we don't know what their resources are, and so it's hard to teach them. When we learn, we have to build on what we know. If the teacher doesn't know what you know, it's hard. It's going to be hard. The worst example we have of this kind of business in the States, the worst we've had so far, is there got to be this kind of decontextualized notion of how parents should talk to their kids. And so there was this really awful research that was easy to take apart as just a piece of junk. But it was cited all over the place, and it said that, by the time they're 3 years old, middle-class, affluent children have a huge vocabulary compared to other kids, and low-income kids especially. And so people were intervening in parents' lives and telling them how they should, giving them tape recorders so they could be taped while they talk to their kids, knowing nothing, of course, about the culture or the values or the situation of the families, and trying to train all these parents in all these difficult, sometimes in very difficult circumstances, to talk like people who, relative to them, are very privileged. It was such a interruption and a devaluing of the kind of translanguaging that could have gone on. It took a long time for people to really be able to critique that and get rid of it. But I think it'll resurface again, because those things do. But to know and to value all of us, I think we have to have classrooms like that. We have to have schools like that. We have to do that as planeteers, people of the earth. Otherwise, we're going to blow each other up, because we don't know each other, I think. Okay, that's my late night ranting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dyson. Next, Mbak Sofi atau Mbak Vina yang akan memberikan opini mengenai pertanyaan ini. Saya persilakan. Mbak Vina mungkin ya berurutan ya.
Barangkali mau Mbak Sofi dulu tadi.
Oh ya, yang mana saja? Saya persilakan.
Baik, terima kasih. Mungkin apologize Profesor Dyson, I will be speaking in bahasa. Mungkin nanti kita translate ya Mbak Sari. Ya, terima kasih Desvi ya atas pertanyaannya. Betul barangkali. I think it was Becky Francis who reminded us that unfortunately up to date educational institution continue to produce inequalities. Jadi Becky Francis itu pernah mengatakan bahwa lembaga pendidikan itu seringkali menjadi lembaga yang terus-menerus memproduksi ketidaksetaraan. Tadi mungkin sudah disampaikan oleh Profesor Dyson bagaimana memang dan juga di presentasinya Ibu Sofi tadi bagaimana memang sistem pendidikan yang ada di kita atau institusi pendidikan yang ada di kita itu seringkali menggunakan norma-norma mayoritas. So educational institution is often built upon the norm of the majority. I mean, we are talking about the majority. I think in the case of the US, it can be built upon the concept of whiteness, for example, and also the middle class family. In Indonesian context, I think Japanese values are very strong. It is considered as the norm. Di konteks Indonesia mungkin kalau di Inggris konteksnya kulit putih menengah ke atas, di Indonesia seringkali nilai-nilai mayoritas itu berangkat barangkali dari nilai-nilai Jawa ya yang cukup dominan, and also Islamic values juga ya barangkali, dan kemudian juga tadi nilai-nilai kelas menengah, sehingga memang akhirnya tanpa sadar anak-anak yang datang dari keluarga menengah ke bawah, seperti yang ditunjukkan dalam riset Ibu Sofi Dewayani tadi, itu seringkali dikonstruksikan sebagai lian. So children who are coming from the lower class family are often constructed as the other. They are somehow seen to be deficient, mereka dilihat sebagai defisit, mereka tidak punya kapasitas, dan akhirnya juga tadi ya hal-hal yang diceritakan Mbak Sofi Dewayani, mulai dari masalah uang jajan, masalah baju seragam, itu seringkali kemudian membuat posisi anak-anak dari kelas menengah ke atas diposisikan sebagai sosok yang lian, sosok yang berbeda, sosok yang barangkali disubordinasikan. Dan ini juga mungkin kalau saya boleh kaitkan dengan tulisan saya tadi dengan presentasi saya tadi, sayangnya wacana-wacana seperti neuroscience juga semakin menyembunyikan perbedaan tersebut. So I think if I can go back to my presentation, I would like to say that it is exactly what the neuroscience does at the same time, because neuroscience is very much concealing the problem in a society. It conceals the differences in the society. So everybody, including teachers, who probably are coming from the lower class background themselves, are forced to believe that the problem lies in the children's individual development rather than the sociological factor. Jadi guru-guru, orang tua juga ya melalui program-program parenting dibuat percaya bahwa masalah itu terletak pada anaknya, pada merekanya, bukan pada faktor-faktor sosial seperti kemiskinan seperti itu. Nah ini yang mungkin memang perlu tadi ya dikembangkan pendidikan yang jadi ketika kita berbicara when we are talking about a culturally responsive, locally context education, ketika kita berbicara tentang pendidikan yang responsif dengan budaya lokal, dengan konteks budaya di mana itu anak berada, barangkali juga sebetulnya termasuk di dalamnya adalah sensitif dengan kenyataan bahwa anak-anak tidak semua datang dari kelas yang berbeda. So it is, I think, also implied that when we are aiming for developing a culturally sensitive education, a locally responsive education, I think it should be embedded within the notion that the education should also be designed in a way that it is responsive toward the needs of children who are coming from low economic background. Dan salah satu caranya adalah dengan tadi merekognisi ya, kalau menggunakan kembali presentasinya Mbak Sofi Dewayani, merekognisi funds of knowledge mereka by recognizing their funds of knowledge, that they do have agency, they have their own way of constructing meaning, they have their own way of constructing knowledge that perhaps might appear to be different, but it is another form of constructing knowledge rather than seeing it as something that is completely different or the other gitu. Jadi tidak semata-mata melihat itu sebagai sesuatu yang tadi ya, kalau menurut Mbak Deswi akhirnya dianggap menjadi sesuatu yang salah gitu. Tapi mungkin kita memang harus mulai melebarkan perspektif kita, membuka mata kita bahwa memang ada cara-cara yang berbeda di dalam mengkonstruksi ilmu pengetahuan yang sangat dipengaruhi oleh konteks di mana anak-anak itu berada. Mungkin barangkali seperti itu.
Terima kasih. Kita lanjutkan ke Mbak Sofi untuk memberikan tanggapannya.
Yeah, maybe adding just a little bit. I think one similarity between street children in Bandung and children living in the village in North Kalimantan is they are cultural expert in the very specific knowledge. For example, street children in Bandung, they have musical ears and they are really expert in counting with numbers using money. I don't like to say this because this is like a stereotyping, but well, this is not the knowledge that they gain in school. For example, like teachers don't do the knowledge as a stepping stone, or as a way to scaffold their knowledge into achieving something new. Yeah. So, for example, children in North Kalimantan, they are a swimmer. They are a good swimmer because they live like in a village in which is surrounded by rivers. They can swim like anytime they want in the afternoon, and they also participate in farming activities. But I also wondered why teachers, like in a context of public school in which the number of students are big, di sekolah-sekolah negeri itu guru-guru tidak membicarakan ini, tetapi mereka membicarakan matematika itu sebagai konsep yang abstrak. Mereka tidak menggunakan alat peraga dari hal-hal yang dikuasai, menggunakan contoh-contoh dari kegiatan berladang seperti itu. Dan demikian pula ketika belajar matematika, when the children learn mathematics in school, in public school, the teachers do not use examples from, for example, like songs, music that they learn in the street, songs that they created in the street. So it doesn't happen. So I think it's there is like the inferiority from teachers, bahwa kalau mereka membicarakan hal seperti ini tidak educational, tidak sesuai dengan kurikulum, dan ada kekhawatiran bahwa kurikulum tidak akan tuntas. There seems to be a worry that when teachers use these examples, they are not achieving the curriculum standards. So I think that's the worry. So in this kind of situation, teachers should be aware of like flexibility. That well, yeah, you have the curriculum as a standard, but you have to create your own curriculum when you teach children from the specific context. I think that's the point that I want to underline, Mbak Sari. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mbak Sophie. I would like to invite one more comments, or just to Mbak Yunisari Amalia. Silakan, Mbak.
Terima kasih dari Mbak Sari ke Mbak Sari juga. Salam kenal Mbak Sari.
Salam kenal juga, Mbak. Mbak Yuni.
Terima kasih sekali. Ini saya dari kantor karena sedang ada wisuda. Terima kasih kepada Ibu Sophie Dewayani, Mbak Sophie. Beliau ini adalah mentor saya ya. Selama saya di Urbana dan sesudahnya sangat membantu dalam selama pendidikan saya di US, baik secara akademis maupun non akademis. Forever mentor. Dan hello to Professor Dyson. How are you doing? What time is it there? Is it early in the morning? Is it so it's midnight? Is it
midnight? Yeah.
Oh my goodness. You're pulling a nighter for this. I really appreciate it, and I'm really happy to see you here. This is one of the well, at least one of the things that enable us to meet globally during the pandemic, where this kind of dialogue before it wasn't intensified before. So I'm at the office because we have graduation or commencement. So but we are doing it with a very strict protocol. I have had my PCR test yesterday. Thankfully, I'm negative. So and then I had a double mask as well. I'm just taking it off in my office because there's nobody here. So I hope everybody is staying healthy and well. It's the cases are going up and down in that note. So I'd like to ask a question to you, also to all the presenters today and all the participants for the discussion. Like, what are the lessons learned in the United States, or that we will keep learning during the education during the pandemic? And then also, in your opinion, what are the 3 most important things that we should improve within the teacher education, so as to be able to prepare ourselves when any sort of emergency hit in the future, or like what are the most challenging things that took place, and any efforts to solve the issues, because right now as well, even though we are in higher ed, but our lecturers who work closely with the teachers locally, we're racking our brains so as to have our children be safe, but also not experiencing further learning loss, although we gain things. And I'm actually overseeing a unit that is in digital learning. So I'm all for digital learning, but also how to make this digital learning more humane, more increasing the soft skills, and not just so the digital is just a medium, but how do we mold the learning within this digital era, so as to not further losing the social communication and skills and soft skills that we should teach our students, or give our students the opportunities to grow. So what are the learning experiences that we can embrace or increase in this type of learning, and we're all hit by this. There is no manual about this, so I'd like to learn more about it. And also, who do we leave further behind in this type of education? For instance, like at Universitas Erlangga, we have students with special needs, and before the pandemic, we have other students volunteer, or we also have volunteers to help the students with their note, with their communication, but now they're on their own. We also have international students who are students with disabilities. So what are the things to think about so that we're not further leaving them behind? I am so sorry, I just got too excited. Lots of questions. So sorry. Thank you Ibu Panitia, luar biasa TOP BGT. Ini benar-benar jadi momentum untuk curhat nasional.
Yeah, sangat relatable Mbak Yuni ya. I think everyone here experienced that kind of challenges that you have mentioned. Baik, kita beri kesempatan kepada pembicara untuk menanggapi. Silakan, Mbak Sofi mau memulai duluan.
Is it about distant learning, yeah?
Yeah, like how when the situation where we are limited to online learning, how do we do about it? This is posing another challenge about literacy learning, yeah. Well, we're still not really have that issue now.
Ya, simpelnya 3 hal yang perlu diperbaiki di dalam teacher ed yang kedepannya bisa kita perbaiki kalau ada situasi macam ini. Terus yang kedua, bagaimana mengusung soft skill dan and so on di dalam distance learning. That's it. Terima kasih.
Yeah, yeah, I am aware that not only the government, but many educational institutions are taking a big deal of teaching teacher and in-service teacher and pre-service teacher of how best take advantage of online like media and technology. But I think that's not the I, I, I'm not so much into that. Even though that is of course important, but I think for teachers it's not like using technology as a medium, but tending to individual need of the children, especially if they are dealing with children of early years, early childhood education and early grades of elementary schools, like tending to every individual needs of their emotional needs and their psychomotor needs, and how they think of the best way to deal with the needs. I think that's what is need to be done. Like teaching at the right level is what we need in this case, in the case of early childhood education, because learning is best occur in authentic interaction. Yeah, I think the social interaction in which children can interact with their peers and also adults, and in a situation where they use like pre-enriched materials like books or all kinds of activities where they can do role plays. And I don't think technology is the best replacement for that. It's not replaceable by technology. So I think tending to every in the case in North Kalimantan, Mbak Sari, teacher have to do home visits and to some children who are disadvantaged from access to technology, and they also carry books there, and they also carry like school supplies to homes because their parents are illiterate and they cannot assist with home learning. So teachers practically do that in some remote areas. Yeah, unfortunately, we have many areas who are not accessible by technology. So yeah, I hope that answers. Sorry if this is not an ideal answer.
Yeah, sure. I think we're dealing with it differently. I know many teachers, especially in the remote area and rural areas that I come across here on the teachers development program, they admitted that they have to do something else, either to have to visit their students directly or preparing kind of like a small group, of course, with the notion of keeping everyone safe, making sure that they are in the condition where it is possible to do, because they think that, especially with younger children, it is so hard to do this kind of learning. So they have to think about the alternatives, things that can work for them. Maybe for us in higher education, we have some resources and yeah, we can afford to do that, but for some early childhood educators, that's a really very hard to do. So they have to find different ways for that. Yeah, so I can relate to that, but Sophie, with how technology might not be for everyone, even though it is part of the children's life too, as yeah, as much as other popular culture that influence the way children's doing their literacy practices. All right, let's listen to the comments from Dr. Vina. Mbak Vina, silakan, Mbak.
Thank you very much. Maybe I see pandemic in a slightly different ways. I think for me, pandemic is really an opportunity for us to redefine the meaning of education. I think very often, including in early childhood education, education is narrow only into the cognitive aspect, only the academic aspect. And I think what the pandemic has taught us is that care is indeed very important, especially when you are teaching young children, especially as Bu Sophie mentioned just now, that one of the things that technology cannot replace is that how to translate care into the online system. Young children, they need to be touched, they need to be, the children's well-being plays a very important role. I myself, for example, during this pandemic, I'm very careful in giving grades to my student, because I'm aware if I'm giving grades to my student, maybe I'm not measuring their academic performance, but rather I'm measuring their inequality, because as we all know, in Indonesia and probably all over the globe, we are having what we call as the technology inequalities, that not all people have equal access to technology. Even, for example, I'm living in the urban areas in Bandung, but during this webinar, for example, there are moments when several times my internet got disrupted. I know that some of my students who come from rural areas, they are struggling to do this online learning. So for me, pandemic is really an opportunity for us to redefine the meaning of education, that we should play more focus into care. Care is indeed very important in early childhood education setting, but I believe that care also plays a crucial role in other level of education, including primary and also higher education. And because we are dealing with these inequalities during this pandemic, as UNDP says, if there are one things that is being magnified during this pandemic is inequalities. I think people experience pandemic in a different ways. People who come from lower class family definitely do not experience pandemic the same way as middle upper class people. So, and considering there are so many discourses in education that aim to sustain the status quo, for example, as in my presentation, I take an example of neuroscience discourse. I think maybe it is also an invitation that a teacher training institution, rather than focusing on the curriculum aspect. I'm not saying curriculum is not important, but I think there is also the need to teach the pre-surface teacher the critical thinking, the critical theories. They need to be equipped with understanding that society is structured in a ways that it perpetuates certain status quo. And I think teachers need to be aware. They need to be prepared so that, for example, following the previous question, when they are teaching, they are aware that teachers are not coming from homogeneous background. Children are coming from heterogeneous background. It's important for teachers to develop the anti-bias teaching, for example, that will be responsive toward children from different needs. And I think, again, that is highlighted during this pandemic, the needs to have this responsive teaching embodied within the concept of care. And maybe the last thing I would like to say is that very often we ask the teacher what they have to do during this pandemic. But I think we also need to go beyond this deficit model in seeing the teachers. I think we need to believe that teachers, they have capacity, they have agency to mitigate their teaching practices during this pandemic. I think we've seen several news that went viral in Indonesia, how teachers, they go extra mile to teach young children during this pandemic because they are teaching in a rural areas that have limited access to internet. So what they do is that they are visiting each children's house just to make sure that each child receive an educational activity. So sometimes we also need to go beyond deficit model of teachers. Instead of asking what the teacher have to do, I think sometimes we also need to recognize not only the children's fun knowledge, but I think in my opinion, it is also important to recognize the teacher's fun knowledge, trusting the children, believing in the trusting the teachers, believing in the teacher's agency. I believe that is something that is also equally important reminder that all of us probably needs to remember during this pandemic.
Thank you, Bafina, for the comments. I think that's kind of wrap up with that. Let's listen to the last comment from Dr. Dyson regarding this issue.
Well, in the States, during the worst month of it, well, actually, it was really about a year and a half of lockdowns and social unrest related to that. Nonetheless, I have three things I think I can say that just reinforce what's already been said. First, that I think the themes of how you respond to the pandemic discourse is very similar to the things we have discussed tonight in a conference I've very much enjoyed and learned a lot and was very grateful to be here. One is that when people start talking, at least in the States, and I obviously do not know about Indonesia, except that as far as I can tell, similar issues are unfolding in varied places. But when they talk about pandemic loss, they're speaking very narrowly. They have in mind that ladder of objectives, and they're worried about the ladder of objectives. And if we go back into teaching the old way, I don't see how anything positive will come from this, because it'll just be focused on those skills that the kids haven't learned yet, and it'll be intensive, narrow education, which has nothing to do with any of the themes about contextualization and understanding kids' resources and working against deficit expectations that we were discussing. The second thing is that the inequalities, not only in education, but also in health care, have been so dramatically revealed by this pandemic in the States. So I think, just like when you teach, in responding to the pandemic, we've had to be very sensitive to the particular situation. You've talked already, you've already mentioned the problem of technology not being equally accessible to everyone. And then, even if there is like a smartphone, if there's many kids in that house, who gets to use it and when? There are all kinds of issues related to the particular situation of the family. The other thing I would say is there adult available or not? Some parents have had to work through this. Usually it's low-income parents who've had to, be essential workers and drive the buses and or go to the hospitals, not only as doctors, but as room cleaners and greeters of the people and organizers. All of those people, that means that kids have not necessarily, some kids sit with their parents and their parents have quit their jobs because they want to be there and teach their children. But that's a luxury that a lot of people don't even have. So I think that just as you were talking about, especially with the little kids who, yes, they watch TV, but when they watch TV, they also play and talk back and, they do many things at once. The teachers are not looking for that kind of response. So the teachers have had to be the professionals that too often they are denied the respect for being. They've had to prepare bags and go out and try to figure out a safe way to do it when the pandemic was raging, to bring things to kids so they'd have a book, so they'd have things to draw with and paper on which to draw and fun activities to do that they could report on. Often things having to do with paying attention to the environment around you, to the animals you see, or the weather, or the trees, something that is available in that neighborhood. Because the kids have to interact with other people and they have to be involved. So I think it's the professionalism of teachers that I wanted to call attention to. And I agree with the comments about social interaction and caring. I had someone do a project in my qualitative research class. It was hard because they have to do a project and, schools weren't even open. But there were a few that were doing Zoom classes. So someone went and participate. They got permission from the teacher, which was a miracle, to participate in the Zoom class for, I think it was a kindergarten class, or maybe it was first grade. And when one teacher was teaching, the kids had to be all muted, like, and we understand that why tonight, you know, everybody always wants everybody muted. But the kids just sat there, and you could see by their faces that they were doing lots of different things, and you could see the different situations that kids were in. Some were sitting in the middle of a room crowded with other kids. Others had animals jumping around the whole time. You know, they weren't really into it. But then the specials teacher came in, like the one who teaches art. She wasn't going to have an art lesson with them that particular day, but she just said, well, unmute yourselves. Tell me what little adventure you've had. Tell me a story about what you've been doing. And they all started talking at once, and they were sharing, and they couldn't get it out fast enough. And I wished, you know, she could stay longer, and then they could write or draw or do something where they could share, and you just saw these kids come to life. So I think that that's kind of gone. I worry that will continue to go by the wayside as we worry about loss rather than continuing with the kids on their journeys. So that's all I have to say. Except
Thank
thanks.
you. Thank you, Dr. Dyson, Dr. Sophie Dewayani, and Dr. Vina, for your time and sharing of the results of your research and engagement with teachers as well as children, especially in the area of literacy. It's been inspiring, and I think what you have said in the last session, I think kind of wrap up the topic that we have today. The literacy gain or loss that we experience as we learn during this pandemic. So I think that's all. There are many comments that I see in the chat box, but unfortunately we don't have any more time to address all of these questions and comments. Really appreciate all your participation. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu, banyak sekali yang pertanyaan yang datang, tetapi sayang sekali kita tidak punya cukup waktu untuk melanjutkan. Sekarang sudah pukul 12:02, melebihi waktu yang kita jadwalkan ya, sampai pukul 12. Terima kasih sekali lagi. Ada satu hadiah dari panitia untuk salah satu penanya ya, yang di sini adalah Mbak Despi ya. Nanti panitia akan menghubungi Mbak. Ada hadiah buku dari kajian literasi. Nanti akan dihubungi oleh panitia. Terima kasih semuanya atas partisipasi dan diskusi kita pada hari ini. Thank you again for all the presenters who have shared very important topics of early literacy. I'm Sari Silviani, the moderator today. Thank you so much for everyone, and I will hand it back to the MC today. Silakan Mbak Rita.
Okay, terima kasih banyak Dr. Sari. So thank you so much, Dr. Sari, for sharing this discussion effectively warm for the past 3.5 hours. Okay, so thank you again for a very fruitful session, the respected resource person. So to conclude today's webinar, please allow me to announce some names. So the first participants who have attended and actively taken part in this webinar are asked to fill out the exit survey form in the link provided as seen in the chat box. And then please be well informed on the next agenda of new literacy studies by following Kajian Literasi Baru social media, both in Instagram and YouTube channel. And as Dr. Sari has already mentioned, so congratulations to Ms. Desvi Wahyuni. Please kindly send your full address via email to kajianliterasibaru2020@gmail.com. Silakan dikirimkan data lengkapnya ke email kajianliterasibaru2020 kecil semua @gmail.com. So you are going to have this book Miss Desvi. So congratulations once again. Last but not least, we would like to invite you to open your video as we are going to take group picture to conclude our meeting. So the committee are going to take a screenshot of you. Hope you're doing with this kind of arrangement. And please kindly hold your chat. Otherwise, your friends might be covered with your chats. Okay, so I have 2 pages in our screen. Okay, don't forget to, I'm going to count 1, 2, 3. Okay, so if you are willing to be taking notes, please kindly open your video. So, okay, 1, 2. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm going to move to the second screen. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much for that. So on behalf of the committee, I would like to again thank you so much for your participation. Terima kasih banyak atas kehadirannya. Atas nama panitia yang bertugas, kami mengaturkan terima kasih. Dan kemudian mari kita tutup acara hari ini dengan ucapan hamdalah. So let's close this webinar by saying Alhamdulillah. I'm Rita Anggurwati. I'm signing out. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih.
Good afternoon.
Terima kasih.
Good night, Dr. Dyson. Thank you so much for
Terima
this.
kasih Bu Sari.
Profesor Dyson, Mbak Sofi, Mbak Sari,
Terima kasih Mbak Yuni.
Prof. Dyson. I hope you still remember me. Baik Bapak Ibu, untuk Zoom meetingnya akan saya akhiri. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Waalaikumsalam.
Terima kasih Mbak Larissa. Pamit, sampai ketemu lagi.
Mbak Vina, terima kasih Mbak Sari.
Assalamualaikum Mbak Sofi.
Terima kasih. Thank you.